Yeah, we're live. Hey there. Welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. This is a place where nothing escapes scrutiny. We examine everything under the microscope of logic. So today we're bringing back our guest, Luiz Razo Bravo. We had a chat with Luiz 2 weeks ago on voting, on rights, on equal rights, whether or not people have equal rights, and whether or not people should have the right to vote equally. And it was such an interesting conversation, such a broad conversation that we could not cover everything. And we thought that we had to do this conversation again. And now I recall during afterwards when Luis had left, we kept on the conversation and we talked a bit for about an hour or so. And I thought it would be good to bring some other voices to, interview Luis on this so that there is more clarity. Um, Chloe seemed to understand better than many of us what Louise was talking about. So maybe her line of questioning will shed some illumination into it. And Steve had some very strong objections, which I thought made a lot of sense. So today he's going to be bringing those objections to Louise, and I'm hoping that Louise would be able to answer those questions as satisfactorily as possible. So if you're just joining us, make sure you like the stream. Um, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to support us, you can support the stream with super stickers and super chats. And if you want to be a part of our Discord community, I'm going to be posting the link to the Discord in the description box so that you can be a part of the Discord community. So that's it from me. So over to you. I think we should start with Luis. Should we start with Luis? Should Luis give us sort of a background, just give us a background or a summary of what he was trying to communicate to us the last time, and then we'll take it from there. So over to you, Luis.
Perfect. Thanks so much for the opportunity. Let me start by saying that I disagree with the idea that people shouldn't have equal rights. I think people should have equal rights. I absolutely agree with this, equal rights. However, the basic proposition is that in order to guarantee, I'm going to try to share my screen. Okay. Are you on my screen?
I can't see your screen. Oh, I can see your screen now. Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, so the idea here is that people should have equal rights, but the irony or the paradox is that in order to guarantee a nation or a planet where people truly have equal dignity, you have to accept the idea that people are not equal. So the basic proposition stems from a statistical reality about nature, and specifically about human nature. It's known as the bell curve or the normal distribution. So we see here on the screen the bell curve, and what this represents is the fact that in nature and in life, things are different. In our case, we're talking about people being different. So we have to recognize that people are not equal. We can accept, we can agree that people are equal in dignity and rights, but that's about as far as our equality goes. We're literally unequal in every other imaginable way, from height to weight to intelligence to literally everything you can imagine. For example, here on the screen, you see that height is symbolized going from 3 feet to 8 feet. And when we go down to 3 feet, we measure people's height. We get very, very few people, if any, at 3 feet. At the opposite extreme, we get very, very few people at 8 feet tall. But in the middle, in the median, we get lots and lots of people. So this is how nature, generally speaking, organizes itself. So the proposition is that in order to create societies and a planet that truly respects the equal dignity of every human, we have to recognize that somebody like Putin is not equal to somebody like Zelensky. And this is a very clear example of two fundamentally different kinds of people. So if we live in a society where we're giving everybody who is like Putin an equal vote, that is one vote, to all of the people who are more like Zelensky, we're going to create an imbalanced, unfair society, which is what's happening now with the situation in Ukraine. So this continuum of people from Zelensky on one extreme to Putin on the other extreme is how nature organizes itself. So the idea, basic idea is that we need to incorporate this reality into our voting systems and give more weight to the people who are more like Zelensky and less weight to the people who are more like Putin. So that's the basic proposal, and I suppose I'll open up to questions or objections.
Yeah, so I want to make sure that I'm understanding it correctly, because I don't want to misrepresent you, and because I think that would do both of us a disservice, right? So I think the first thing I would ask is really where is the value of the things that you're weighing equal the equality against?
Can you rephrase that? I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, sure. What are the components of human nature and human beings that you are using to make a claim that they are unequal? Is it just in height? Is it IQ, income?
This is an empirical reality about everything. Literally anything that can be measured, humans are never equal. There's always a bell curve distribution. So you can measure intelligence, height, weight, altruism, anything you measure, it's always going to organize itself into a bell curve. So that's the idea. The argument itself, the central argument, is physical and mathematical in nature. So it's the first proposal is to measure altruism, but the argument isn't tied to measuring altruism. A person should be free based on their own dignity, or a group of people should be free based on the dignity of that group to give taller people more of a vote, or more intelligent people, or any specific measure can be used as the basis to compete for political power. I think the most logical one is altruism, but it doesn't have to be. A person is free. I'm not trying to force altruistic principles onto anybody else. Could be anything. Could be height, weight, skin color, anything. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. I'm still a little bit fuzzy on why we should particularly value those specific things more than others. So it's a valuation problem for me. I don't understand why we are choosing one criteria over another, and what the importance of that criteria is. Because if we're going by the bell curve, the one thing that we do know that affects politics more than anything is money, and money is not distributed evenly over a bell curve. It's usually a Pareto scale. So I'm just kind of curious in how you would respond to that.
Let's see if I understand you. You're saying that current political systems favor, or the power of money is disproportionate in current political systems. Is that right?
Correct, because what we've got is a bunch of very, very rich people casting more than one vote. Because you've got corporations that act as a vote now as well, with lobbying, and money drives a lot of that kind of marketplace. So what we already have is an unequal society where one person, depending upon the wealth and dependent upon how that wealth is distributed, the ones at the highest level of that Pareto scale tend to have more influence, more money, and more opportunities to buy more votes.
Absolutely. I think that's a very solid objection, and I agree with you absolutely. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons that I propose altruism as a measure of the inequality of people is precisely to combat that reality, that people who are generally richer, generally more self-interested, have an inordinate influence on our political systems. So the claim is that if we use altruism, and specifically measured proportionally, so that a 10% contribution by a school teacher is equal to a 10% contribution by Bill Gates, even if Bill Gates contributes a lot more in absolute terms. If we compete on this basis, what we effectively do is remove anybody who has wealth from the political decision-making process.
Yeah, but wouldn't they be able to? Because we had Citizens United versus the FEC here in the United States in 2011, and we saw a massive shift in politics during that time. Up until that time, Democrats and Republicans, they kind of crossed over for bipartisanship goals fairly frequently. It was a lot more during the 70s and 80s, or 60s and 70s, and a little bit of the 80s, but it started to taper off really heavily at around 2011, because the shift of political power was changed by that decision, that Supreme Court decision. And so what we had people with just massive amounts of money being able to buy every senator they could possibly, wallet. And, I've got, part of my problem is that now we've got more than one person casting more than one vote, right? Because each industry that they have an influence over is going to basically account for one vote. And we know that senators do not vote against the parties of those who are interested in them, right? So tobacco executives or people who are paid by the tobacco industry generally do not vote against the tobacco industry. It would be, suicide, political suicide. So, that's where one of my biggest concerns lie. And the other one is that I'm a very horrible libertarian. Okay. I don't believe in free market capitalism because I think it's damaging, and unrestricted and unregulated capitalism can do just as much harm as almost any other system. And the reason why I say I'm a horrible libertarian is because I don't believe in the altruism of human beings. If those were the cases, we would have had a much better outcome in history. We wouldn't have had so many blatant wars. I mean, communism itself tried to make people equal, but ended up making them dead, which is probably the highest form of inequality we can think of, right? Because I would much rather be alive than dead. So the biggest problem, I guess, the biggest argument that I have here is that throughout history, we can very clearly see that people do not behave altruistically, even when it's in their best interest to do so. The fear of losing is much stronger than the fear of gaining, or the promise of gaining, right? And we've been able to bore this out in multiple different social studies, many different psychological studies conducted over the last couple of years. So I think the biggest qualm that I really have is that, for one, is to deny someone an equal vote is equal to and paramount to basically their First Amendment rights to freedom of expression. We have the freedom to express our views through our vote. And to reduce that, I believe, would create an inherent disparity. And on top of that, we've already actually witnessed that in the United States before. I'm not sure where you're from, but many people know this throughout the world is we had a serious situation here at the formation of our government. And when our country was first formed, we had an issue with slavery. And within that issue of slavery was the 3/5 compromise. And this was basically saying that racialized black folk did not have an equal vote. They were counted as 3/5 of a white man, because if they would have had a full vote, they would have voted themselves out of slavery. You get what I'm saying? So my concern is those who don't have a greater vote than others would immediately be put into a disparaging position where they would not be able to vote themselves out of a problem that those of us who had a higher vote put them in.
Oh.
So there's a serious concern that I have here.
Well, they didn't have a 3/5 of a vote. They were just counted in terms of the population in selection for like Congress, right? Like they didn't have
right.
They didn't vote, 3 times out of 5.
Well, they didn't have the right to vote anyways.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
what I'm saying is that they were counted as 3/5, meaning they didn't have the representation to cast a vote within the electoral college and such. So we already see that the value of a human being can be directly tied to the political outcome of an entire group of people. So it's a huge concern that I have.
Well, yeah, I share that concern, and that's obviously not what's being proposed. That's why
Right. And I don't mean to
Yeah.
misrepresent you, Louis. I apologize if it came
Yeah,
out that
no.
way. But it is a significant argument.
Allow me to clarify and respond to this objection, which I think is not correct, because when we say that humans are not altruistic, this is just empirically not the case. There's a bell curve, right? In anything that can be measured, there's always a bell curve. So it's like saying humans are not tall or humans are not short. The fact is that there's a continuum of measurement from very tall to very short, or very intelligent to very dull. The same thing with altruism. There's humans that are incredibly altruistic, and there's humans that are incredibly the opposite, no? Incredibly selfish. Again, think of the Putin, Zelensky, Mother Teresa continuum. This is the way humanity works. What's being proposed is the exact opposite of what your concern is, to make people less. What we actually trying to do is respect and honor the dignity of every human being. So on this bell curve, there's always going to be people who are more apt to recognize that dignity and people who are less apt to recognize that dignity.
Mm-hmm.
So my fundamental argument is that somebody like Mother Teresa or somebody like Zelensky is much more apt to recognize the dignity of every person, irrespective of religion, sexuality, etc., ideology, if they are more like Mother Teresa and more like Zelensky than they are like Putin. So that's the idea. And I should say this as well, that if you're libertarian, my argument is fundamentally a libertarian argument. You're arguing essentially that no, I don't want to compete in a fair market for political votes. I prefer to have a quasi-communist system where everybody has an equal vote. Imagine an economy where everybody is granted $1 and only $1 to spend as they wish. This is not only inefficient, ineffective, it's communist, and ultimately it's doomed to fail, just like all communism has failed. Just like what we're seeing now, the breakdown of traditional liberal Western values and democracy, the divisions that we're seeing in the US, the divisions that are taking place in Europe, all of these, I argue, are come about precisely because the US and Western civilization is founded on the communist or quasi-communist idea that people are equal.
All right, so
I have a rebuttal to that, but go ahead, Boyd.
Okay.
So I understand your concepts, and I see these types of issues reflected in completely different topics and spaces, right? Like, you know, completely different technologies actually are trying to encounter this very problem of equality in influence in a very particular space. So one is like in gaming or in anime or in like a particular media property in which the people who have been actually caring and have altruism towards a particular property for a really long time. Let's say they're a fan for something for decades, and they've invested money and they've invested, engagement, and traditionally their reward has been that the media fits the fan base is what they want in it. So like they get what they they reward things, and they're rewarded by getting things that they want to see. But now that there is a shift for equality and inclusivity to make sure that a particular property speaks to everyone, irregardless if they have invested their time and effort into that property, and it causes a lot of tension and distress and conflict within those fandoms or those spaces, because the people who have been there the longest saying like, why are you changing all this stuff, for someone who just kind of claims that they have expressed interest in it, and they say this needs to be equal, this needs to speak to everyone irregardless if they've been there from the beginning. So I understand that concept of like actually measuring the the relative to the topic, the altruism, the people who care about these things, in order to kind of guide the ship as to where the direction of those things go. And when they deviate from that of trying to do equality, it just becomes a mess and things become like they break down and become less successful. So I understand that. So in terms of governance, I understand that, of course, you would want to have someone who cares the most about that topic, cares the most about the community, the country, to have a better vote than someone who maybe is more antisocial or destructive. And I guess I kind of feel like, and so you're proposing a way of having to measure who deserves a larger vote versus who is just kind of going to be like an outsider who's going to try to damage the whole system because they're not really invested in it. And you're picking altruism. And I guess I guess I have like at least kind of diverging to like one objection to kind of that in a slight way, but then in another way saying that we can easily kind of measure that because we can vote more than we think that we do, right? Like the only time that kind of people think that their vote matters is like a presidential election, especially in the US. But there are, student boards, like there's community, there's the lower level in which people generally don't vote in those things. And the people that do vote are expressing their altruism and their care for those things. So therefore they actually have a larger outside influence in those elections because they actually show up and vote. And so it tends to go to the way of people who actually do care. So I guess my argument is that we do kind of have a measurement for that, and that the people who do like traditionally consistently vote have a more effective influence on things that happen locally, opposed to people who just don't vote and don't care. Therefore they kind of lose, their vote doesn't matter because they didn't vote. And you only vote if you actually care. So I think that we kind of already have that, but I guess for you, would it be that we would tweak that we would be able to have like track how often someone voted in an election, not tracking their votes, not tracking who they voted for, but increasing the influence of someone who's voted consistently in a particular area, as opposed to a group of people that just decided to pick up this cause and then decide to vote in an election, and like because they've all been kind of rallied or someone is influencing them to all of a sudden take interest in that particular topic.
Let me try to repeat, see if I understood the question.
Sorry, I said a lot.
Yeah, your concern is that people who donate their time and effort on a local level are already giving more than people who don't, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so I would say that, okay, I agree, absolutely, that's absolutely true. And people give at different levels throughout society, from the local, regional, national, and international level. So that's obviously the case. But still, those people who are donating more on the local level have influence at that local level, but they still have to be governed by the macro political system. So they still have to be told what to do, and the policies are implemented by people who are making rules on a larger level. So now, for example, there's no rules on an international level, right? Or there's no enforcer on an international level. So Putin can do his thing with Ukraine. He invades Ukraine because he can. But within Russian society and within Ukrainian society, there's a series of laws that everybody at all levels have to follow. So the idea is to change the laws at the highest level, at the international level, and then at the national level as well, so that the people who are giving the most at the local level have the appropriate influence, not only at the local level, but also at every level higher than that. I'm not sure if it's clear that we measure we measure a person, or the proposal is to measure a person or their voting power by how much they donate in taxes. Is that clear? Are we clear about that?
Yeah, I'm clear about that, but I guess my argument is that there are other ways that people show that they care and they donate by donating their time, which is like, time is money, right? Like a person, like for me, for my HOA, sometimes I would leave my job early so that I can be a part of my community and make decisions and to be aware of the decisions that are being made. So like I didn't actually pay the money, but I have opted myself out of earning that hour of pay in order to actually joining that board and to be part of those decisions. And the people that don't go, they're not a part of those decisions, right? And so I have an outsized influence on that because I have opted out. I have made a particular sacrifice, right? And I guess getting to what you said about kind of like the overall rules and international community, like we don't have a direct democracy. Like we don't directly, all of us have one vote to vote for the president. It is all filtered up on that level. And I do get your point on, I mean, it does matter our elected officials, right? And, you know, on a local level, and then, you know, those people who, you know, like like a larger politician can endorse a local politician and to influence them to get voted in. And so to increase that popularity of that person. And so there is kind of more of a top-down influence versus like kind of a bottom-up. And I don't understand. I guess I think it's seeing the path of how one vote, one person kind of can influence who the top is and then kind of go down. But then, you know, I don't think that it's feasible. And this is what the founding fathers kind of realized. It's not feasible to have a direct democracy on all of the rules, even on a federal level. Like we all don't vote on those. We vote in proxies to vote on those things for us.
I see. Well, it's still, as a matter of principle, it doesn't change if we just take the House of Representatives and the Senate into consideration. It's one person, one vote. So that's a fallacy. It still applies. And furthermore, those persons in the House of Representatives and the Senate have all been voted into power, into their positions of power, through one person, one vote. So you actually accumulate the fallacy at the local election level, and then you multiply it at the Senate and the House of Representatives. So under the proposal, go ahead.
Well, I guess, but that depends strongly if you're on a presidential election year, because for the off years, right, when we're voting for a congressman, right, like those elections are kind of more influenced by the people who are actually interested in those, they're actually kind of more so tuned in. They're more of a reliable voter. So, I mean, again, kind of getting back into maybe the tweak that I was proposing of actually having looking at your local voting record, right? And
that's perfect. That's perfect. That's perfect. Let me respond to this point. Because a question for you: who's more likely to take into consideration all of the volunteer time or all of the productivity that an individual has on a local level? You think it's somebody that is interested in making money for themselves, or somebody who has given all of their own money away?
I mean, it could be someone who's given all of their money away, but
help me understand this.
Yeah. I mean, so it is more likely for that person, right? And I guess maybe I should bring up my other kind of objection to that is I'm going to bring up an example that's going to seem kind of random, but it kind of leads into like the fact that I've seen the kind of this pattern in other places. And so there is an idea of a, have you heard of a DAO before in like the cryptocurrency space?
Sure.
Yeah. And so like the more that you kind of invest in those things, then the larger the vote that you have, right? And I understand the cryptocurrency space has a lot of scams. I'm not talking about scams. I'm talking about people who are genuinely invested, and they actually invest a lot of money into these things in order to make the DAO flourish. And there has been a story in which, you know, there is like it's called the Spice DAO, in which they're huge fans of the property called Dune. And so they wanted to use the DAO to make creative works. That's the purpose of the DAO. And so they had one person who was really well-meaning, and he invested like $3 million into it in order to make this decision to buy a Jodorowsky. Basically Jodorowsky is the director who was going to make a version of Dune that's considered the greatest film never made. And so he had like basically a large book that he would send to producers to get investments for it. And so these people, one of these things was on, it was auctioned for like $30,000. And so the person who had that large vote, who was meaning very, very well, bought that thing for $3 million, thinking that would buy them rights. And so that was kind of like, a lot of people made fun of the DAO in general. And they kind of said, like, you know, they didn't research, they didn't understand what was going on. They didn't understand the property, like the intellectual property laws. And I think that's kind of my issue, is if you're just basing it on the tax, like someone who chooses to spend all of their money on, you know, who's so altruistic to spend all of their money to do the good thing of like they spend 100% of their extra income to pay for taxes, so that there's a really altruistic person, but that doesn't really necessarily might not track that they know the best thing to do, right? Like they can mean very well, but that they might not still make the best decisions.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely the case. That's why what's being proposed here is not a way for a person to gain absolute authority. What's being proposed here is an evolution of democracy, so that in the case that you mentioned, that one person making one decision, obviously humans are subject to making bad decisions. So in a democracy, the idea is the persons who give the most would not be able to make policy single-handedly, just as one senator or one representative can't make policy. It's a process, right? Where people deliberate, argue back and forth, and then you make a decision, hopefully a wise decision about what policy should be. So I absolutely agree with you. That's not what's being proposed though.
Okay. I have one, this is going to be like kind of like a weird example. What about, and I mentioned this is going to be like hyperbolic, right? What if a cult, you know, like what if you had like a lot of people who were willing to donate all of their income, but they all followed one ideology, so that it would actually have a mass of people who believe the same thing, and they would be able to get the vote, right? Like, you know, the cult leader says, donate your whole income to taxes, therefore we can make policy, right? How would your system deal with that?
Let me quickly share my screen so we can be very specific about the numbers that are.
Didn't Catholicism do that for centuries?
Interesting. We'll come back to Catholicism.
It's all right. It's just a joke, Louis.
I don't think it's an accident that Catholicism is the single most successful organization in the history of the planet. Nothing else has survived 2,000 years. Nothing else. And I don't think it's an accident.
So again, I'm just saying my example is more so inspired by Rosh Purnam in Oregon, where that's what they literally tried to do, is they tried to hijack democracy by getting all of their cult members to vote.
I remember that.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I suppose that could be a problem, but it's a problem as it is now, no? I would argue that what's being proposed would make that less of a problem, less likely, precisely because of the numbers that are involved and precisely because of the specific algorithm that's being proposed. So the algorithm, very quickly, this is much longer than, it'll take me much longer to explain this than I have here.
Again, I think that's why maybe at least that's why I'm offering that modification of looking at consistent voter history, that you have consistently been there, because for Roch Perunam, they literally were busing in homeless people in order to boost the voting numbers. And if you actually had we care about votes that have consistently voted more than 3 times, or they're weighted right based off of how many times you voted locally. A homeless person that's recently moved to a place, just they got paid to vote for whoever cult leader is going to be the mayor. It wouldn't even work. It wouldn't even happen anyway.
Sure, absolutely, that makes sense. It's a valid objection, but I think we've got it handled because of the algorithm. What you see on the screen here is the actual algorithm. I'm not going to pretend to explain it here, but it incorporates lifetime average voluntary taxes, so that one person who donates one time, 1 year, will be relatively powerless. And you can't ship in homeless people who don't have a history of donating very high percentages of voluntary taxes. So to give you an idea here, here's some numbers. Again, the algorithm is based on physics and math. So on the physics and math, they govern reality. And it's based on the inverse square law. So for example, if you hear in red, for example, somebody who only pays what they're obligated to pay, someone who donates 0% in the US, there's approximately 200 million voters. Okay, so they would have 1 vote. Okay, 1 vote for that person. But the persons who paid 100% average throughout their lives would get 60 million votes. So the amount of additional power that you're giving to those who give the most is totally disproportionate. So that the kinds of things that you're talking about, bringing in homeless people who have never voted, who just can't, it's impossible. It would be impossible in theory.
Yeah, I guess so. Another objection about just the taxes, right? And this is why, maybe we can have a mixture of taxes and the investment in the voting history, right? Because there are situations in which people are trying to save as much money as possible. They can be perfectly altruistic, but they can't afford to they might care very deeply and very, very passionate about their community and this type of having influence and very very knowledgeable, very passionate, very altruistic, but they're in massive amount of debt and they have to nail down their debt before they're able to donate their extra income into taxes. And so I see that there are conflicts there where not everyone is even in the circumstance where they have the luxury of donating a majority of their extra income into taxes.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you there. But precisely, again, I return to the idea, who's more likely to lower the tax rates of these people who need and want to save their money? Money-hungry politicians or people who have given already their own money for the sake of others? Who's more likely to say, we need to respect these people who want to save their money?
But the thing is, the taxes, how much we're being charged in taxes, it isn't just an artificial lever as someone is just going to be money hungry and the government saying, I just want to take a bunch of money in taxes. It also is influenced by the fact of what systems we actually want to pay for, how much, Medicaid, Medicare, how those this policy decisions on how they're implemented affects how much they cost, therefore affects our tax burden. And I think it's because it's a multi-layered, complicated issue. It's not as simple of we just vote for people to lower taxes and then suddenly people are like, why are the emergency room lines extra long? And because all of these decisions are changed and influence each other.
I'm so sorry. I'm not sure I understood your last response here.
So I guess because you said, like, if we rest our hopes in the people that donate all of their money to lower taxes, right? And then they choose to lower taxes to help the people that want to save money. When they do that, they might have other adverse consequences that they actually weren't thinking about, because they actually had high taxes because of how expensive their medical care system was, right?
Sure,
And that
sure.
there was a high level of taxes kind of for a reason, and it wasn't about someone just choosing to have high taxes.
No,
it could have
absolutely.
been, someone who was trying to be responsible to pay for things that people said that they wanted, but they kind of, at the end, they don't realize that's why their taxes are so high.
Sure, no, absolutely. I think it's a matter of experiment. But again, I return to the idea, who's more likely to settle on the more just, the more effective, the most just and effective tax rate? Somebody who's looking out for themselves and their family, or somebody who's looking out for the common good?
Yeah, it's for like the altruism, and I just, I think we're in agreement. I like to poke holes at people, like,
That's fine. No, I appreciate it.
What, like, all of these different use cases, or sometimes like abuse cases. That's kind of what I do professionally.
Fantastic. No, I appreciate it.
But I also, I've gone on long enough. Steve wants to say stuff. Sorry.
Okay.
It's okay, Chloe. I appreciate your voice, and your brain. It's always good to hear you talk. So, a couple of things that I was thinking about as Chloe was talking was there's a couple of other points of contention that I have, which is, I do a lot of volunteer work in my local community, but none of that's on paper. Right. So I actually, like, just this last week, I probably put in 10 hours worth of work for a local community that is nowhere on paper. It's just, it's my volunteership. Right. So I see a problem with that, because, the money that I make from my job, I mean, I don't even have a savings account. Right. So I don't have 50% to put into paying more in taxes to get a bigger vote. And I still don't understand how that relationship is going to elicit a better result than it already has. And then on top of that, we have, what about handicapped folks? What about people who are incapable of working, who are incapable of, putting in the appropriate taxes to get what you're proposing out? And then on top of that, it seems like it's not us that's the problem. It seems like it's the politicians that are the problem, because they're the ones that are making these laws. They're the ones that are sponsoring these laws. Like, just during COVID, this was a big deal. Multiple different what are they called? The stimulus packages, right? You had Republicans and Democrats putting shit in these bills that had nothing to do with helping the American people. Like, absolutely nothing. Right. And those things things shouldn't have even been in there. That these laws should have been directed at helping the Americans, quite frankly. So it doesn't seem like it's us that's the problem. It seems like the people that we put into office are the problem. And I think I think it's conflating the two, I think, a little bit too dangerously close to one another, because if we wanted to change something, we could easily, I think the best option would be to reverse, Citizens United versus FEC. And that would do a massive amount of good, much more than changing the way that we vote. And then when you talk about the bell curve, and this is kind of what I've been really kind of concerned about is that everybody has a different position where they stand in line with the things that they're concerned about, that they may be altruistic about one thing, but not altruistic about another. And so what we do is we may be not accounting for the mean of all apexes of all bell curves throughout time. And so I'm just kind of curious how you would answer those questions. And I can restate them one by one if you'd like.
Well,
I realize there's a lot there.
Yeah, there's quite a bit there. One by one. The politicians are the problem? Absolutely. Yeah. Politicians are the problem. The kind of people that make it into power under one person, one vote. We know this from experience. It's an empirical question. All of the politicians in the House of Representatives and the Senate, they're all they're all practically rich, if not multimillionaires. And how do they get so wealthy if their primary job is to make laws and look out for the common good? Doesn't make any sense. That's the primary problem. I absolutely agree with you. Your second point?
My second point is the volunteership is not on paper, and only approximately 1% of Americans actually volunteer their time. It's a relatively small number.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I would respond the way I responded to Chloe. So, who's more likely to take into consideration your volunteer hours or your contribution to the local community? Current politicians who are only looking out, or who are primarily looking out for themselves and their families, or the kinds of people that I'm proposing who give the most? My proposal, my claim is that it's much more likely for somebody who has literally giving everything that they have in terms of work, talent, effort, salary, money, to recognize that a person is donating their own time, their own effort, their own resources to others, and they're not getting paid for it. They're likely to recognize that and give some kind of recompense, either in votes or pay you for it, or make up for that time that you're investing in the local community. Much
but
more
those
politicians.
Yeah, those two people can exist in the same person, though. So you can be concerned about your personal life, your personal family, and the lives of your community. Those two don't need to be, they can be mutually, combined into one individual, or completely exclusive to one individual. I see kind of a fallacy there of how would you put it? Assuming the consequence, right? So we're assuming that the problem is, in this sense, it's like, okay, well, the room is dark, therefore the light is out, but nobody's asking if the damn thing's plugged in. So are we looking at the wrong problem?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand. Let me go back and clarify a little bit. Your objection was that volunteer hours don't get recognized.
Right. They're not on paper. There's no way to affirm that person is as altruistic as they can be. There's no way to verify it.
Okay. My response to this is that, going back to the bell curve, there are people for whom that doesn't matter, right? Some people would look at that and say, I don't care. So what? You want to give your time? Go ahead. That's your problem. And there are other people who would say, look, he or she is giving their time and their effort and their resources, and they're not getting paid for it. They should be paid for it, or they should be recognized with more political power than those in the same community who don't give anything.
Right. I guess the main thing that I have here is that it seems like we're overcomplicating an already complicated process. So why should we make it more complicated? And for the most part, most Americans don't even understand our system. But the system that you propose is going to be infinitely more difficult to understand for the average American. So I'm just kind of curious on what you would think about that.
I know Charles has a question, but I have one question. When you're talking about paying extra and the vote relative into taxes, are you talking about an outsized effect on both the federal and the local level? Because I have to pay my state taxes and federal taxes. And are you just talking about on the federal level or on the state level?
It could be both. If you give most of your voluntary taxes on the local level, then you would have more power on the local level. But you wouldn't have more power. You wouldn't have more power on the federal level.
But if I give all of my taxes to the federal level, there's no forum there that I can vote to actually have that effect.
Please repeat.
So what, like, maybe like, except for like voting for the president, right? If I, and we only vote for the president once every 4 years, if I put 100% of my taxes into like the federal level, that only works once every 4 years. And so I lose influence on my local elections just to kind of strongly influence on the federal level, when for the most part, the things that are going to affect my community and me are on the local level. So I guess that's just like kind of like the weird hink that I see, because, for the federal level, in terms of one person, one vote type of thing, we have so few like access points where that is the case, where we don't have direct democracy on the federal level.
Okay, well, you simply, the idea that if you contribute more on the federal level can easily be just reversed. If you give all your money on the federal level, your influence at the local level could be outsized.
Okay, but it's like yours is basically, it's like either way, like I just have to pay more in taxes in general.
It depends on, because if you give it on the local level, you're being more selfish. The idea here is to compete for altruism. So if you want to take it to the international level, whoever donates more on the international level gets more influence at the international level and all the way down.
But
because
right.
if you're in Europe or in the US or in Africa, and you're giving all of your money away to people that you'll never see, you'll never know, you're being less selfish.
But
okay, sorry. Let me just jump right in real quick. So 3 things. 1, I want to ask 1 question. 2, Mr. Police will jump in after my question. Then 3, I've seen some beautiful questions that has been asked by Crystal Bank, and I would like us to address them. So after Mr. Police's question, I will just highlight them on the screen. I like Luis to respond to those questions. So now my question is, how does your system account for the motivation of people? Because I know that people have their own motivations why they want to do certain things. So how does your system account for people's motivations? Because the truth is, not everyone is altruistic, and not the most altruistic people are going to be in a position where they're going to be able to control the most. They're giving them the most power to vote, or even giving them the most power to the positions of authority. So how exactly are you going to fall into the fact that human beings are cynical and people can try to work the system because people have motivations? And how are you going to account for those motivations that are less than altruistic? After this, Mr. Pelu, you go. After you answer this question.
Okay, let me see if I understand your objection. Your objection is that you think that people will try to scam the system because not everybody is altruistic. Is that the case?
That's part of it. That's part of it. But my major question is, how does your system account for people's motivations? You understand? You're not going to have everybody with. Yes, how do you account for people's motivations?
I'm not sure how do I account for motivations. Why would people give throughout their whole lives all of their money, their wealth, their work away for other people?
Yeah, they could give it away for a very sinister reason. They could give it away for power. If the ultimate goal is power, then they could give it away. I think it's wrong, or it's short-sighted to assume that anyone who gives away that much is doing it because they are altruistic. They could be seeing the bigger picture. They could be making some very brilliant calculations from here and seeing that if I do this in 6 years, 10 years, 20 years time, this is how much power I would be able to get. So in essence, it has defeated the goal of what you're proposing in the first place because it's corruptible.
I think I might be able to give a good example of what Charles is trying to ask you. Is if you take someone like Jeff Bezos, who's got billions and billions of dollars, and he can afford to throw just massive amounts of money at massive amounts of people and buy their votes, what in your system is an equalizer against that kind of nefarious behavior?
Math Math. It's mathematically impossible. With some basic assumptions, it's mathematically impossible because Bill Gates or Bezos only has 100% to work with. Okay, so that 100%, if he gives it all away, he becomes poor.
Yeah, but he could buy my 100%. He could easily buy my 100% for the life for my life and many other people's lives. So what? Because there's more than enough money there. You know what I mean? To buy other people whose wage, let's say I make $65,000 a year, he could pay $65,000 a year to me for the rest of my life, and he could easily buy my vote for that.
Okay, couple of responses there. Number one, it would be illegal. Okay, it's illegal. It would be illegal to do that. Okay, it's already difficult to do that under the current democracy. Now, if we compete to see who's willing to give more of their money away, it would be it would be even more difficult to get away with this kind of thing. But even if you could, even assuming they could, it's mathematically impossible because of the numbers and because of the algorithm. You can't give 100% or even 50% because you begin to lose your wealth. And imagine a conspiracy where you're involving hundreds of thousands of people and nobody says anything. Again, it's illegal. People don't do that now under the current system.
Well, it's just a thought problem to determine whether or not the system is robust.
Sure, but mathematically, my claim is that mathematically it would be impossible, and I have the math to demonstrate that to be the case. I don't think today we can get into that, but I'd be happy to schedule another session and we can go into that. But it's a mathematically rigorous model. It's not just. I should clarify here that what I'm proposing here is not a random, spontaneous proposal that I haven't worked through. I've written my PhD on this. I have a background in social choice theory and in physics. It's actually a very rigorous, robust mathematical proposal that's very well thought out. I appreciate the objections that are being raised here, but the claim is that they're not valid objections and that I can demonstrate that they're not valid. So back to Charles, what he's saying that, a person who has bad intentions, who can give away all their money and calculate and all that, they still are only one person. Even if Jeff Bezos does this, he's still only one person. So even in the United States, if you assume that 0.01% of people will be willing to give 100%, you're talking about 30 million people. Or I'm sorry, 3 million people. So even if Jeff Bezos were willing to do this, he would only be one vote out of 3 million people. So nobody's going to do this. That's the argument. Nobody's going to do this.
No, but is he going to just have one vote? Is Bill Gates to just have one vote? I thought the idea was to give you more votes the more you give as a percentage of your income. So if Gates is able to give 99.9% of his wealth, which leaves him with still a considerable amount of money to be able to live well off than most people on this planet, is he still going to just have one vote?
No. If he gives 99%, he'll have the number of votes equivalent to every other person who's given 99%.
I understand what you're saying.
So he'll have a lot more. He'll have a lot more than somebody who gives 0, but he won't have any more than anybody who gives 99.
Okay, but doesn't it just make it very, very sort of a complex system? Sorry, Mr. Pelugo. After this, just go ahead, Mr.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me. Nice to be invited here. Mr. Razo Bravo. The one thing I would like to ask, because I actually went through your video. I went through the physical roots of physical foundation morality. I think I don't know if I'm getting the title right. And your ideas are very interesting. But the one thing I would like to add is, wouldn't the energies of the altruistic be more effectively placed in educating people about the physical about the physical foundations of morality, and bring about the necessary cultural changes to have a better society. Wouldn't the focus? I mean, your ideas are interesting. I'm not saying I'm totally I totally understand or totally convinced about it. So, but I do find your ideas interesting. But wouldn't the best thing? Shouldn't the focus should be cultural education of the people to live in line with aspects of symmetry, beauty, and develop the proper axiologies and value structures in society and culture first? And shouldn't that be the focus before we look to the power? Because if we have the right culture, the right values, the right symmetry, the right beauty, the right aesthetics, wouldn't that itself manifest society we want to see? Thank you.
That's a good question. Education is a tricky subject. The answer is yes and no. Education, we have a nice experiment over the last 7 or 8 decades in the US, where we've seen that what education does is polarize people even more. What education does is disproportionately reward the most intelligent and disproportionately punish the least intelligent. So on that level, traditional historical education is clearly not the answer, because what it does is polarize the planet and polarize society. However, education is, in the sense that ultimately what we need to do is change the kinds of people and the kinds of values and the kinds of principles that we're teaching in schools. But it's certainly not the traditional kind of equality, free markets. Equality and free markets, what it does is lead to a polarized society and the kind of situation that we're having in Ukraine. That's my argument.
Okay, I just want to be clear. I want to make it clear what I was speaking about, right? I was saying that the people that they're going through your moral foundations the physical foundations of morality, right? It seems like you're presenting a metaphysical or physical, or traditionally I would say metaphysical, but you're taking the metaphysical and making it physical, which is good. I think your endeavor is a worthwhile endeavor, trying to find the physical, because the way I seen it, it was like you're trying to have a physically quantitative view of what people historically would call spirituality, right? And I think that is a very good undertaking that you're doing. But when I mean education, I meant education in value structures. I meant, that's why I first used the word axiology, how we get values, because you talked about symmetry, beauty. You're talking about how things in nature, the cause of less. I forgot the word the least active, or the less something. But I totally understand the concept you were doing. So, that you were proposing. So my point is, shouldn't this be incorporated into integral education system, and the people that subscribe to your way of thinking, shouldn't they put their efforts and their altruism in educating these people in a new system of education, or in a better system of education, or in an additional system of education to bring about the change in society that we like to see? And if we have the right society, with the right society naturally prop up the better governments. Because if people are better educated, I don't see how it will polarize society more. If people are educated about the right things, educated about the right values, educated about the right aesthetics, they'll spread the proper behavior and conducts in society to govern ourselves, to maximize the potentialities of the human species, and bring about the most happiness and abundance, how you were saying it, abundance, or the most life or abundant life in society, if people are educated to do good and live good. So I would say that, I personally would direct education there. So I can't see how the education itself, where you're saying that would be the more polarizing thing. It depends what you call it education, because what is true education, what is not education? That's all good questions. So should our education be a system, education in values, and how does your way of thinking and your philosophy add into making a society of people who use better judgment? Thank you. So that's the education I'm speaking of.
Do you have time to answer that, Louis? Do you have time?
Yeah. I have time.
Okay.
I have time. Absolutely. I agree with you. Education, and that's why I consider myself primarily an educator. And I founded the European Institute of Science and Management precisely because of this, because my mission is to teach, and my mission is to change literally the entire educational values and system of the planet. So yes, on that level, yes. But I think short of what's being proposed here, traditional education was, we've seen from experience that what it does is polarize people.
All right. So I have a point that it ties together something that you said, and that's actually a point about education, or at least knowledge, right? So getting back to what you were saying about, like, let's say if we were so altruistic, we had a system in which, I can donate all of my money in order to influence international matters, right? Like I can influence policy that happens like in Africa, because I feel like so strongly that if they did this, this will be a good thing. And I'm going to pull from a direct example of, I think in, remember like Cecil the Lion, in which there was an outcry that there was paid poaching that was happening, and that so many people here in America, here in the West, were crying out that they should ban, hunting for sport for these rare animals, that they should just ban it, and that these people should not, endorse that. That business anymore. And I think they successfully got them to ban it for maybe like 5 days, and they quietly instituted again, because the thing is, what people didn't realize with what big game hunting does, that's how they fund their wildlife preservation, right? They actually have a whole system that Americans aren't aware of, that, they find problematic. Like there's like an adolescent, like there is like, let's say there's a herd of rhinos, right? And there's a male rhino that literally like was so aggressive against a female pregnant rhino that she lost her baby, which reduces the population overall. And it actually is so aggressive that the females can't breed. So they would put that rhino up for big game hunting, and a person will pay like $30,000 to $80,000 just to hunt that one rhino. And that amount of money pays for people to basically, monitor for poachers, to protect the rhinos that are that are there, and is actually a pretty robust system that, cuts down poaching. And they just have they allow a little bit of hunting to control it, to fund everything else. Because if they didn't have that system, the hunters would be paid by poachers to let poachers just indiscriminately kill all of these big game hunters. And so in that situation, when I found out about that, and I was seeing in the West they wanted to heavily influence these people to make these decisions, that they have a better knowledge locally, I think that's where I think there's a tension of, making decisions on a larger level where you kind of don't really understand how those systems work, and really why they maybe might do in those like, do it those ways. That's where I think factors into education, right? Like, I don't think that I should be able to influence policy in like Zimbabwe if I wasn't educated on those things. But if I just gave enough, and I was, altruistic enough. And I agree with you. I don't think that the issue of Bill Gates or Bezos is as much as a problem. I agree with your reasoning about that. But my concern is people who genuinely do mean well and are extremely altruistic, but they are extremely ignorant.
Yeah, good point. But isn't that the American problem now? Trying to go around the world,
Yeah, it is.
Policy.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it is.
And why does the U.S. do it? At least partly, because it's profit seeking, it's protection, it's exploitation, it's all of these reasons.
But it's not profit seeking with trying to stop a completely separate industry, because you could say that those people in Africa they themselves are profit seeking, but they are profit seeking in the sense that they want to maintain a livelihood, and they need to fund these preservation. They're practical. They need to fund these preservation efforts. So they have to seek a certain level of profits to fund these things. But these, people in the West, they're not profit seeking in those sense. they benefit, or they don't benefit from these things, and they're if they get that industry shut down, they don't make more money, and if that industry keeps going on, they don't make less money. So like in that situation, no one's that they're pushing that policy completely regardless to profit sinking.
Okay, good point. Very good point. I would say that part of the reason why these people are allowed to do this is because they're working within a larger framework that allows them to do that. I think if we allowed the most altruistic people to make policy on an international level, these larger group of people would not allow for that kind of ignorant meddling in other people's economies when you don't know enough. It makes more sense. It makes more sense for a person who's truly not self-interested to say, we have to listen to what the most altruistic people in that society have to say about their problems.
So you're saying
Not what
altruistic
I want
people
to
talking to other altruistic people, not
exactly.
that. Okay.
Exactly. And if the people in the most in the regions that need the most help from other regions, then precisely the most altruistic people from other parts of the planet are most likely to give them the resources, not to establish the policy that they need to, or that they think is best for them. So you have, I think you nailed it when you said you have altruistic people in one region dealing with the most altruistic people in the other region to problem solve and experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have time for one more, Louis?
I have time. I was concerned because my boy is sleeping, but it looks like they're okay.
I know that feeling. I know it.
Yeah.
So I've got 2 boys and a girl. Okay, so I think I didn't make myself clear at the very earliest. I'm really concerned about the ethical standpoint of inequality as you explain it, and it seems to me that I don't know how to explain this better, but let me address the point of communism really quick. The reason why it's that you state that it's quasi-communistic, and I agree to a certain extent, except for the fact that the reason why Marx wanted to equalize society was first and foremost it was based off of a flaw model, right? So he wanted everybody to have the same amount of things, rather than viewing people themselves as the valuation model itself, right? So he didn't see people as important, and that's why it didn't work well. He viewed it too much from the physical, the why am I missing words? From the materialistic point of view. That's where he was focused on, was the materialistic point of view being disproportionately handed out to individuals, rather than the American way, which is we appropriate every human being with equality under the law, right? So what it seems like to me when we take a vote and we either increase it or decrease it based on, what I'm still unclear about is the specific values and why we should value them so much more than others, is it becomes a problem of equity and not equality. Am I correct in assuming that? Because that's how it's making sense in my head, and I'm trying to be charitable. So that's why I'm asking you if that seems accurate, because I obviously I take issue with equity, and I've been a studier of Russian literature. I've read Marx, I've read Solzhenitsyn twice, all of his books. So I'm passionate about communism in the sense that I have dedicated most of my life against fighting against it, right? So I can completely understand where you're coming up with a quasi-communistic point of view, and you're completely right from that standpoint. But from the base level, why Marx did it, I think, was inherently incorrect and wrong in so many ways, which is why it killed 150 million people. But capitalism hasn't done that. Capitalism hasn't directly caused 150 million people to lose their life in labor camps and famine and starvation. Like, our biggest problem right now is obesity, is heart disease linked to obesity. You know what I mean? So I have conflicts about the ethicalness of what you're proposing, and I need to say that I don't think you're a bad person. I think you're a great person. I think you're trying to change the world, and we need ideas that do change the world to be better. So I hope you don't get the opinion that I'm attacking you, that you're a bad person or anything like that. I don't believe that at all. I believe that you actually have a genuine good idea, or you're a good moral person, and you're just trying to do good. The problem that I have is that Marx tried to do something good too, and it ended up killing 150 million people. So is there a self-criteria that we're going to use under your system? Is there oversight to ensure not only the ethical play that this is supposed to be making, or the payout that your idea is supposed to be making? Do we have oversight? Are there ways of making sure that we're not killing 150 million people due to the idea?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, let me clarify that I'm no revolutionary, so absolutely not. I think realistically, one thing is the idea in itself and the logic that underpins it and the science that underpins it. Another thing is the reality of whether or not it's going to be implemented. I don't think it will be implemented. I think that the planet has to go through a very, very difficult and painful learning process to understand that the errors that we've made and that we're operating under. And then maybe on a completely different planet with a different mindset, it might make sense to implement something like this after we have learned the price of not aligning ourselves with the physical and mathematical laws of nature. Okay. So in response to your comment about communism, absolutely, communism has caused a lot of problems, a lot of deaths, a lot of murder. My argument is that the communism of the West, that the West is under, or the quasi-communism that the West is currently under, is going to cause orders of magnitude more death than communism ever has. And let's not forget the number of deaths that this idea has caused in the West, through to the Native Americans in America, to the people of Africa. All of this has been well-intentioned. The idea supposedly we're superior. It was a great contribution to the history of man, etc. But they're based on a mistake, and the mistake was Adam Smith's. Adam Smith said that the value of an object depends on how much work is put into the object. But this is a mistake that Marx later capitalized on.
The labor theory of value.
Exactly, the labor theory. This is recognized as a mistake. But this mistake was incorporated into the very foundation of the United States, because value is subjective, it's not objective. Value depends on how much a person is willing to pay for something. So when you treat society or a nation as if it were a pizza that you can dole out, you can cut up into equal pieces and dole it out, this is a communist mistake, because that's not how human nature works. It's not how people value things. People value society. People value the other person. People value peace, justice, to different degrees. And if you try to build a society on the idea that everybody should get one slice of pizza, that's why you get what we have now, which is a planet that is necessarily going to end up in situations like the situation in Ukraine, because we don't know how to manage ourselves. We don't know how to manage our differences. And that's a big problem. So I'm not sure if that responds to your question.
Kind of. It's more or less. I don't believe that it's one vote being split between one pizza. I think it's one vote being split between 50 pizzas, because it's rarely just one pizza that we're voting on, right? It's usually 40, whatever you want to call it. On both the state, local, state, and federal level, there's multiple different pizzas that we're voting on. So it's not necessarily one vote for one problem. It's usually one vote at the local level, one vote at a state level, and sometimes a vote on a federal level. I mean, we know that not everybody in the United States votes, right?
Well,
so
I would say that just amplifies the error.
Right, it does.
It just amplifies the error. The only way to fix it is to incorporate how human nature really works. And the fact is that humans are different, and humans value things differently. And if we want to remain alive as a species, we have to incorporate this into our decision-making processes. That's the argument.
Making it more complicated, doesn't that automatically increase the number of the failure rate, or the opportunities to fail?
I'm glad you brought that up, because several people have, or a couple of people have brought that up, the complicated thing. I remind you that I can literally explain this to 5-year-olds and they get it immediately. They immediately get it.
I would agree with you, Louis, because it's like, why make it more complicated? Because humans are complicated. Because if you look at economics before, and people would be very confused of why their economic models just didn't map out. It's like, people should value these things, people should behave in these ways based off of this very strict model of human, very simplistic model of human. But then behavioral economics came about that kind of completely flipped it on its head to make it to explain as to why people, like I said, like, people place particular values on things that weren't previously taken into account in other, the previous economic fields, to actually make it make sense. So basically what you're proposing, Louis, is a similar kind of revolution, like, of that happening to governance as what happened to the economics field.
I suppose. I'm not sure I understand completely your objection or your comment.
No, it's not an objection. It's an agreement in the fact of why it's more complicated, because behavioral economics, it explains the complication. Because before, people thought like, well, like, humans should behave XYZ way if they're paid this much, but because humans take into account like why they stay in a job. Well, we're paying you this much, why don't you just stay in the job? But people take into job satisfaction, commute, and the complicated aspects of a human as to explain their decisions, in which before behavioral economics, it didn't take into those things into account, which said humans are behaving irrationally.
Yeah, good point. I would add further that going back to the original foundation of your channel, Charles, the idea that we proceed under logical, or we accept certain logical principles, and we want to proceed logically. So saying that a system is more complicated is not a valid objection. And we can see this clearly if we go back to before democracy, to 1775, and imagine somebody saying, no, you can't do democracy. You can't, you can't go forward with democracy because that would complicate things. Isn't that more complicated? Or imagine having the same argument when it came time to give blacks the vote. Imagine somebody saying, wait a minute, that's more complicated. That's just, imagine giving blacks vote, or women more votes. That's complicated. Aren't you complicating things? We see clearly in these cases that a complicating objection, or the objection that the proposal gets more complicated, is not valid. It's not an intellectually valid objection.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
Okay, so now my response to that would be, it's not so much the idea that is complicated for the sake of being complicated as the problem. Is the fact that understanding of these concepts by people themselves, if this concept is not easily digestible to people, if it will take a lot of reasoning, if it's not explainable in a sentence and people get it, then ultimately the purpose might be defeated, because not everyone is at that level of abstraction where they are able to make sense of this sort of data, implications of what is going on. So the idea should be simple enough that the common man is going to be able to grab it at at the at the basic level of understanding. They can be able to grab it. They know the implications of these policies that you're proposing, and they're able to take advantage of it, at least for the common good. Because what happens is that if it's not that explainable, in fact, many of these problems we see with the democratic system now is because of the complexities that are introduced into it. Look at taxes and loopholes and all that. Why are those things there? It just makes the whole thing messed up. I heard that tax codes are thousands of pages long. Who has the time to go through thousands of pages of tax code? And then you hear of taxation. Why are those things there? So it's room for a lot of manipulation. If things become complex, there's room for manipulation. But it's as simple as it gets, and it's still functional. Then when there is someone trying to work the system, it becomes apparent that okay, someone's trying to do something shady. But when a system is complex, you can find ways to fit things into it, and it defeats the purpose of it in the first place. So it's not just the argument of this is complex for the sake of being complex.
I see. I would revert back to my original comment that this is so simple. What's being proposed is so simple that a 5-year-old can understand it, and 5-year-olds regularly understand it. It's very simple to demonstrate. In fact, one of these days I'm going to make a video. Small children can understand it. Everybody can understand it. The more you give, the more say you have in the decision-making process. It's not complicated.
So I guess to maybe explain Charles's, like add a little extra to Charles's explanation, like the concept of taxes is a very simple concept, right? But the implementation of the tax code is the complicated system that can hide shady behavior. So I think the objection is the implementation of what you're proposing, which could be a simple idea, could have enough nooks and crevices in its complexity of its implementation to be the risk that Charles was proposing.
I see. Well, I would counter to that the tax code now and the complexity in society is primarily a cover, or it's brought about primarily because the current people in power want it that way. It doesn't need to be that way. Tax havens, because rightfully in some cases, right? Because a person who makes a very interesting product or a service, the market pays them for that. Why should they, in addition to the contribution they've already made to society, why should they also have to pay for rent-seeking politicians who want money for them and their families? They shouldn't. They shouldn't have to pay that. You already are making or contributing to society through your service or through your product. Nobody should be taking your money. You should be able to keep it.
Well, I guess, a big counterexample would be like the tobacco industry, right? That's why, they actually have to pay, like, the tobacco industry, they have to pay for those like truth ads and to discourage, kids from actually consuming their products, because we have found that they are creating a product, but they're not a value added to society.
Okay, well, who is more likely? Again, all of these questions come back to this central question: who's more likely to make better policy? Somebody who's wanting to make money out of that policy, or somebody who has given their own money because they're demonstrated?
Right. Yeah, I wasn't bringing that up as an objection. It was just saying that, like, the mere fact of you creating a product that people purchase means that you shouldn't pay taxes. I was objecting to that particular point. I guess we don't have that much time left. I wanted to ask you, not any objections or anything like that, but it was a video that Pele was referencing. So about basically being able to calculate the influence of a population or a social network, right? Like how you measure influence and the complication of that. Like, if you're like a person has like a critical mass of influence. And so for that type of research, I guess, like, are you talking about like being able to, take into a factor of like you can take into a factor of someone's their appearance, like how attractive they are, how articulate they are, and then see how much influence a person would have in a particular social group. Is that the type of research that you're doing?
No, I think Mr. Pedler was referring to a video about the physical and mathematical foundations of morality. So it's completely different. Yeah.
Completely different.
Yeah, it's completely different to the kind of social influence. And it's a very bold claim, but I think the argument is very strong. I'm using physics and math to argue that we can derive an ought from an is because they're equivalent. It's a little bit complicated, but the argument is there, and I think it's a very sound one. But that's a completely different topic than influence.
I wanted to speak about that ought is distinction, but go ahead.
Oh yeah. No, that's the one you bring up. Yeah, I was talking about the man, because I mean it's an interesting idea. Like that's what I was told to watch. They sent that to watch it, and then don't get me wrong. I mean, because what you're saying is basically the premise of most religions. Most religions actually agree with what you're saying, just not in they might not have mathematically put into like a mathematical physical sense, but most religions are actually saying pretty much the exact same thing that you're saying. Even the terminology used is in the religion the same. You know what I'm saying? So I get what you're saying, and it's commendable that they try and translate ancient concepts that humanity has known for centuries into a more concrete scientific method. It's commendable, but that's why I'm thinking that the efforts of your thinking and your discourse to me is more geared to education more than it's to politics. Because if you educate the people correctly, I just look at what you're doing as maybe a foundations of a new way of a new philosophical school. That's what. But then again, I have to go look at your catalog and really study. If I have more time, I'll definitely go look at your catalog and really study what your work is. But it seems like this is really a philosophical question of how we educate ourselves to be the best people and to value the best things. And even what you're saying, how kids might understand what you're saying, that's more reason why it's an educational thing to ingrain the right values in people, because the same way kids might understand what you're saying more, because kids are just in a more natural position. So if we have an education that gears towards our natural inclinations and natural proclivities, and we could manifest this in our adult life, and manifest this in our judgments and in our decision making processes, and every day we will have. I think we'll have the results that you're looking for in the political sense if we could correct our thinking philosophically and culturally. That was the points I was trying to make. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Bellew. I agree with you that it's often said that there's nothing new under the sun, but I think I beg to differ, because the proposal is actually, it's quite surprising that it's so simple, yet it has never been proposed. In fact, I'm in dialogue with Noam Chomsky, the famous professor at MIT. And one thing I told him is, I said, you have to admit that you've never heard this proposal. And Noam Chomsky, of course, has written 100 and something books, and he's an encyclopedia of knowledge. And he recognized, he says, you're right, I've never heard this proposal. So that in itself is quite surprising, no? How can something so simple have never been proposed before?
No, but hey, I don't think. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't think. See, look, it's two things. Your thinking is been simple and it's been around for a long time, but of course you're looking at different. But then the proposal of the voting, that's a whole different thing. So I mean, so it's two issues at play. Like I still haven't really bought into your one vote, your altruistic vote system. I haven't bought into it. It almost sounds like to me when I first heard it, it almost sounded like it almost sounded like a Tibetan Buddhist theocracy. That's what it sounded like to me when I first heard it. It almost sounded like a Tibetan Buddhist theocracy, because basically what the monks are in Tibet, and they had a theocracy and they ruled. So it kind of sounded like that. I don't necessarily think that's the best way, because I do think people should be motivated. I think even altruism has self-interest, right? Because because like for example, if I'm altruistic to my kids, I'm still self-interested because I look at them as part of me, and my continuation. Just say you look at the people. So altruism to me, it's a way more complicated story that I don't know if we have time to get into all my thoughts, but yeah. Anyway, yeah, let me finish because I'm about to get long-winded for no reason. So let me cut it off now.
Well, I appreciate your contribution and your thoughts. The voluntary tax proposal is actually intimately connected with everything else. So I would encourage you to, and I'd be happy if you would give it more thought and come up with the objections. I always invite objections, critique. To date, for whatever it's worth, my claim is that I have yet to find an intellectually valid objection. And by intellectually valid, I mean one that's not self-contradictory. That's the claim. It's a bold claim. Like I said, I think I can stand by it.
Mm-hmm.
Any final comments or any additional comments?
Yeah. So I really like Hume's is-ought distinction, and it's one that I use frequently to kind of govern the way that I see things and the way that I choose and decide how to act and behave about things. But I'm also a big fan of Sam Harris, and so I understand much of those arguments as well. But I always circle back to what Hume really thought was the is, which kind of played off of Kant's noumenal and phenomenal, and the is as it is, regardless of how we understand it, right? It just is. Like our planet is round. We know it is. Even if we never saw it, even if we never went to space, we can still say that our planet is round and it would still be correct. And it is, we ought to behave as though it would be, right? That way we can circumnavigate the globe and you know what I mean? But we can't make distinctions from is statements, or from ought statements to is statements, because the is statement is the objective way that the world exists, and the ought is the subjective way we use our morality and our ethics and our value systems to decide what's best for us in that circumstance. So I don't see the two being even remotely similar to one another. And so that's what I have on your ought and is distinction problem.
Have you watched my video?
I have.
Do you have a specific objection?
Well, the specific objection is that you combine the two.
Allow me to remark very quickly. The claim is, and the argument is. Listen, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Payload, mute your phone, dude.
Oh.
Okay. So the claim is, I'm using physics. I'm using incontrovertible physical principles to argue that which exists, right? That which exists is the same thing as, if we accept that being, existence, is the ultimate goal. They're the same thing, because physics determines what exists over time. So that which, for example, you have two groups. One believes that it's not okay to slit your wrists. The other group believes that it's great if everybody, when they turn 18, they slit their wrists, right? One group is going to cease to exist. One will continue to exist. So this is how physics works. That's the argument. And
right, but isn't it? Sorry.
And I use incontrovertible physical demonstrable principles to argue that this is the case. If you're going to object to that, I think you have to say, okay, where is the reasoning wrong, or where is the physics wrong? Right.
And so my argument against that would be that physics exists without our necessity to understand it. So in my understanding, physics itself is not proof of things happening, right? It's the way that we explain how they happen. It's our way of trying to make sense and understand how the physical world actually behaves, right? So at some point in there, we still don't understand, like you said, we don't understand how gravity works, which boggles my mind. You know what I mean? Because we can land a spacecraft in Mars within a 3-meter square from Earth over like a year. It's amazing that we still don't understand what it is that actually makes gravity work. We understand how it works, but we don't understand why it works. Right. So I guess that would be my argument to physics, is that yeah, I mean, I can understand what you're talking about, and physics explains the natural world and how it functions, but eventually we have to assume that there's a limitation to our knowledge, which is, that place between, the what is it, man, I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden. It's the theory of everything, right? The what's the title? Good grief, I can't remember what it was called.
Yeah, theory of everything.
Yeah, theory of everything. But so I don't think God makes it work, but that's my opinion because I'm an atheist, so it doesn't really factor into it. But I love math. I love science. I love space. My wife actually got offered a job for SpaceX, and she turned it down to be with me and my sons. So we're big, huge science buffs in our family, and so we follow that kind of. I've actually got a brief history of the universe from Stephen Hawking up there on the on the bookshelf. But no, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I think the distinction really is, for me, is that we still don't understand everything about our universe. And even though physics is the best way we have to understand that universe and the way that it works, it still fails at some points.
Well, that goes beyond what's being claimed. What's being claimed. What's being claimed here is that if this is a big if, if we agree that it's better to live, especially the human species, than to die, then it follows that ought and is are the same thing. That's the claim. Right. Well, not that we have knowledge of what is real and what is no. We have only knowledge about what is in this realm in which we live, where people live or people die. That's the only claim being made. Not any philosophical claims about knowing the nature of truth or the nature of reality. That's beyond the scope of what's being claimed. What's being claimed as what we should do, how we should behave, physics tells us that, because it's the same thing.
But the guillotine is right there between the two, right? So we can say that humans do exist. That's the is. The ought is the valuation that we place on the is. Is like, why should humans exist, right? The is has already been answered. Human beings exist. But we place on it additional values through the ought, which is, well, human beings are awesome and we should live, right? So that's where the ought is. So that's why I say I disagree with the is-ought distinction or the lack of distinction that you're using, is that there, at some point in time, we have to have a discussion about where our value and how we value life and how we value the things that we do value need to come into the conversation, because I'm still unclear about where your ideas are converging with value theory.
Can I just jump in right quickly? Sorry, Mr. Pilo. So now,
no, I just want to jump in. I hear what you're saying, Steve, and that's the point I was always trying to make. We need to. It really sounds like it's a value judge. It's a new philosophy of value judgments that my limited exposure to Razo Bravo, Mr. Razo Bravo was thinking, or Dr. Razo Bravo was thinking, is leading me to do. It's like a philosophical thing, and that's basically what I think the first conversation to start is our philosophical education and our axiology. Thank you. That's the point. That's basically what I was trying to say the whole time.
Yeah, I'm just not confident we need a new one.
Let me just jump right in now. So, Luis, the problem is in the physics, because the physics requires very specific conditions to exist. For example, the example that Steve gave the other time about landing a rover on Mars, it needs very specific calculations and very specific conditions for you to achieve that feat. If there's any little variations, the whole system falls apart. Now, the problem isn't the physics. The problem is people, and people are not machines. You cannot figure out people to a very specific point. You understand? There's going to be variability, and someone who is altruistic this moment, something might happen that that person is no longer altruistic tomorrow. So that human variable. In fact, if you look at any proposal, any system, that we have currently, including communism, capitalism, and whatever, what are you? In theory, if you are able to implement those things perfectly without the human element, they're all beautiful and they're going to give you the desired results. You understand? But just put in human element and you see something that is explosive. So the physics for me isn't the problem. It is the human element. And I just see, I see that this is a potentially volatile mix when you want to mix humans who are unpredictable with this very strict set of physical calculations and conditions. I don't think it's very, very compatible in terms of implementability.
I say let's try
Okay.
it. Well, I guess because I know it's a good response, but the only way we can actually kind of figure out who's kind of right is actually on, I would say, on a small scale, like a town, right? Although what I'm thinking of the best way to actually get everything on the same page is like having a reality show or something like that in which everyone buys into this is how they're going to operate, right? I understand this is kind of like a wacky idea, but I mean, we actually need models, right? Just to actually find out where the holes are in this idea.
Yeah, I would say I agree with Chloe, but to respond to Charles' agreement, I think it's really, really important, and to Steve's comment as well. I think it's really, really important to understand what's being proposed at the correct level of abstraction. Let me explain what I mean by this. What's being proposed is a way to resolve our differences of opinion, not a way to convince other people that they're wrong or right. We know that humans are never going to agree 100% about anything. What's being proposed is a way to resolve our differences of opinion. I'm not trying to convince you that altruism is the way. I'm trying to convince you that what we need is a better way to resolve our differences of opinion. These two things exist on different levels of abstraction. Okay, so Charles, for example, you don't agree with the ideas or the proposal about altruism. You think it's going to be more complicated, and people are complicated, and people are going to try to game the system and destroy the system. Okay, fine. You have a difference of opinion. I have a difference of opinion. I'm not trying to convince you of my opinion. I'm proposing a different way to resolve our differences of opinion. And what you are proposing, if you object to what I'm proposing, if you prefer the status quo, you are arguing for communism. I'm arguing for free market, libertarian principles, where human dignity is recognized, where freedom is recognized, where competition is recognized, and where our political and social systems are aligned with the way the nature itself is aligned. That's the argument. And if you want to say, no, I don't agree, I think we should stick with one person, one vote, fine. But recognize that your argument is communist. Okay, I don't know if that's clear, but I think it's an important point.
Well, let me jump in. Hey, I just want to make one quick jump in. I'm sorry. Yeah, but I don't necessarily how it's automatically communist. Communist is its own philosophical system, is its own materialistic system. Is like, I hear what you're saying, but I to say it's you're automatically communist just because you hold to a one vote, one person system, a one man, one vote system. I think that's I think that's an overstatement. I have to say I think that's an overstatement in my humblest opinion.
I see it as a divisional fallacy, honestly, is we're assuming that, a function of the whole is because of the parts of that whole. And it could be several other reasons why, voting. Sure. I could agree with you on the sense that, some people's votes may be less than others. I disagree with that, but I can say that voting is one part of the problem that leads us to the thing that you are recognizing as the issue, right? Which is like, we're not able to agree on simple things, just the abstract, we don't even agree on. Right. But I think part of that solution is, if we're looking at the whole, it's going to be voting, it's going to be education, it's going to be even religion, it's going to be a multivariate measurement that we're going to be running across all boards. And this is why I mentioned if you were to take all of the bell curves of interest across all planes of existence for all people, you'd find that at the top, at the mean, I would say at the mean, you would come out actually ahead if we consistently stayed the path. Whereas what we're doing is we're tilting that now, and we're accounting, or we're trying to adjust for under the mean. Does that make sense? That's how it makes sense in my head.
Okay, so Luis, sorry, before you respond to that question, let me just add this and say, I've been meaning to say this. I don't think that the idea of equality that you have is the reason why vote is given to people, one man, one vote. It isn't because it's presumed that people are equal. That's why everybody is given one vote. At least I agree that people are equal in dignity. You understand? The other part of equality you're talking about is more sameness. People are the same. People obviously are not the same. You understand? So people are going to vary by height. People are going to vary by intelligence. People are going to vary by so many other attributes. So in that sense, I don't even think that the word equality is the right word we should be using. People are not the same. You want to look at the word equality itself. How do you define equality? I would accept the definition of dignity. People are equal in dignity. You understand? That is something that is intrinsic. That is not. It is not based on variable characteristics. It is based on the objective fact of being a human. So whether you're a fully formed human, whether you're a human whose IQ is not as much as the other person, all those other factors are secondary to the stance of equality itself, which is the quality of dignity. So yes, people are equal in dignity. And if you can accept that people are equal in dignity, and that is the basis of saying because of this equality in dignity, then everybody deserves one vote, then I do not see how that is a quasi-communist system. Because it is not assuming that people are the same. It is actually making the right case that people are equal in dignity, which you yourself agree with.
Okay, let me respond to Charles first, or Steve first, and then Charles. Steve, to the extent that I understood your objection, you're saying that we're meddling with a natural evolutionary process that has worked so far. Is that the case?
No. No, it's well, let me clarify that. And I guess the best way I apologize for not having a more accurate argument here, but I'm not arguing that what is found in nature is good. That's not what I'm arguing. What I'm arguing is that oh, good grief. How would I put that? Oh, and I just lost my train of thought. I apologize. If it makes you feel comfortable, ignore the naturalistic fallacy. I'll think of it again, and because there was a certain pathway in my brain that I was using to argue that, but yeah, damn it.
No, don't worry. This is apart from my.
I remember it.
Okay.
So the naturalistic fallacy was directly aimed at the altruism. So to say that people are naturally altruistic is a violation of the naturalistic, or it is a naturalistic fallacy to say that all human beings are mostly altruistic, because I don't think that we are. Even Alexander Solzhenitsyn made comment of this in the Gulag Archipelago, where he said, and actually Viktor Frankl made a comment about it similar, but I'll stick with Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He said the line dividing between people's hearts between good and evil was a very thin line. It didn't take much to actually push someone over to good and push someone over to evil, but we're constantly balanced between these two sides, and it doesn't take much. to sway us in one position or the other. And I happen to believe that. And that's why I always tell people I'm not a good as person as I think I am. And I make sure that when I'm in positions of power or authority, I'm always having that in the back of my head, and to make sure that that power and authority doesn't go to my head. Right. And so being a libertarian, I'm a horrible libertarian in that sense. You know what I mean? Because I do recognize that people are different, but I don't conflate different with inequality. Right. And I guess that's the best way to explain where my argument is coming from, is because I don't think we're altruistic. Otherwise we wouldn't have regulations on housing, how to build a house. We wouldn't have regulations on how to sell cabbage. We wouldn't have regulations on, any number of thousands of different things that we all go through every day. If we were altruistic, those things would most likely not exist. And so that's my argument against altruism. But I do believe that every human being has their best interest at heart. Absolutely. I think you'd be a fool not to argue for that, because it's a natural thing. Like if there was a famine today and my neighbor's got food and I don't, I have a gun and he doesn't, I'm going to be eating pretty good tonight. You know what I mean? Altruistically, I'd take half of his stuff and leave him with half of his stuff. But the problem is he's going to come after me now. You know what I mean? So I think altruism doesn't really effectively argue your point. At least to me, it doesn't. And I hope you don't take that discharitably. It's just, I try to be a realist. I try to be a realist as best as I possibly can. And the other thing that I'm really concerned about wholly is really, what is that going to look like to people that don't have the influence or the capacity to play into your system? Where are they going to fall? I'm looking at the negative of what might come from using your system. And not being a mathematician or a physicist, I don't have those skills, right? I got friends who are mathematicians and physicists, but I myself am not one. So I'm always concerned about the negative effects of what any given idea is going to have, and the ethics and the valuation problems are two of the biggest fundamental issues that I have with what you're proposing. And I may be incorrect in how I'm assuming that functions, and that might be a part of the contention of why I'm not understanding what you're talking about, or the cause of my disagreements.
Yeah, I think we're not understanding each other completely, because in no way would I claim, or have I ever claimed, to believe that everybody's altruistic. This is obviously not the case. Mother Teresa is universally respected precisely because she is so extraordinary. Zelensky in Ukraine is being hailed as a hero and being honored precisely because he's not the norm. That the average politician in his position flees for their own safety. So these kinds of war heroes, they get awarded. They get awards precisely because they're out of the norm. So definitely not. People are not altruistic. So if that's what you think is my argument, then it's just not the case. First of all. Second, I think I would focus on my previous point, that what I'm not arguing for altruism. I'm arguing for a better way to resolve our differences of opinion. If you don't like my proposal, then there are a series of very serious challenges to one vote, one person, one vote. And these are well known in social choice theory. Kenneth Arrow got a Nobel Prize for a very rigorous mathematical argument that demonstrates why one person, one vote, or why democracy as we understand it is quote unquote impossible. So the challenge is to propose a different way to resolve our differences of opinion. And that's really the argument here. If a person doesn't like altruism, that's fine. Don't like altruism. I happen to think it's a strong argument, but that's not my primary argument. My argument is a better way to resolve our differences of opinion.
Yeah.
You might think taller people or smarter people or whatever. Okay, let's experiment and let's see which which system wins out in the long run.
Well, what I'm saying
the
is that,
argument.
yeah, well, what I'm saying is that I agree with you that altruism shouldn't be used as the primary matrix by which we make these judgments, because altruism can have its own problems. Let's say that, you take Mother Teresa, for example. There's no shortage of concerns that other people have about her treatment of people in Calcutta, right? There were claims that she allowed people to suffer needlessly because of her faith. And so, I mean, is the altruism really the issue, or is the faith really the issue? You know what I mean? And so even when someone has the best intentions, much like Marx did, I have no doubt that Marx was trying to make the world a better place, right? But it led to a very bad situation for 150 plus million people. So I don't like altruism. I would prefer self-interest, honestly, because I can account for self-interest. I know that you are going to feed your children before you feed mine first. I know that. You know what I mean? I can plan for that. I can account for that, but I don't know what to do with altruism, because it's completely subjective in that sense, where I don't know how you're going to behave under an altruistic. I mean, even if we use altruism in any form, I don't know how to account for the actions of that, because I don't agree with some people's altruism. You know what I mean? So I definitely don't want you to think that I'm trying to misrepresent your idea. I'm definitely not trying to do that. I'm trying to be as charitable as I possibly can, and I hope you can see that. I'm a questioner. I like to question things. I like to tear things apart and put them back together again. I mean, I'm a mechanic by trade, so I mean, it follows suit. So I hope that at this point in time, you haven't ever taken anything I've said to heart to be a critical analysis of you as a person. I hope that hasn't come across that way.
No, not at all. Not at all. I would respond to this very quickly by saying that, okay, that's fine. You think self-interest should be the measure? How many people do you think you could get to agree with you?
Probably everybody.
Okay, fine, everybody. Okay, can you defend Putin's actions now? Because he's acting out of self-interest.
I don't think he's acting out of self-interest.
Yeah, I can defend actions.
I think he's acting out of altruism for his own country. I don't think he actually gives a shit about Ukraine.
It could be. Yeah, he doesn't give a shit about Ukraine, definitely.
Why should he?
Well, that's the same point you can say about, unfortunately, Hitler, right? Like, he cared so much about his people that he was willing to bulldoze
kill
over
6 million people.
The same thing can apply to the United States. The United States has not been Mother Teresa of countries in the world.
No, we have not.
No. And it's been, what has been the driver? Has it been altruism, or has it been self-interest?
Okay, let me jump in real quick. I want to say this, if I can. Okay, I get what Steve's saying. That's one of my objections too about the altruism, because how do you really measure altruism? Like, what really is altruism? We might say, like, do we really know what it is? Like, what is altruism? What is really different between self-interest? Because, like I said before, like even when people do things altruistically, is a reason why you're doing things. Everything has a reason. Right, so it's still highly subjective thing to say we're going to base our society out of altruism except for self-interest. Is like we have to get into defining these terms. That's why I say your discourse is good, but I think it's more of a field of education more than this policy, because we have to educate people like what is altruism. Like, for example, if we have an education in what is altruism and know what altruism is and have a unified view of it, we can spread altruism more just by education, because people will understand their interconnectedness to each other. They'll have an integral sense of identity, and see themselves in other people, and this and the third, and we could benefit. So I mean, I'm gonna look more into your discourse. Your discourse is very interesting, but as policy, I don't necessarily. I mean, I'm not completely sold on what you're saying as policy yet.
Okay, fine. I know a lot of people aren't sold on it, but again, revert back to the logic, and what's being proposed is not to agree with me on altruism. That's a specific proposal. What's being put on the table is we have to find a better way to resolve our differences of opinion. Steve puts forth self-interest, but then he has a whole host of different problems with that, because this is well established in social choice theory. In addition to the quasi-communist foundations of errors of Smith, saying that value is something that exists in an object when it exists in the person. It's how much I value, how much a person is willing to pay for something. That's where true value comes from. I would argue that. And let me respond to Charles's point about people equal in dignity. I think we can agree on people equal in dignity. So I'm not exactly clear about what you said, Charles, about your objection. I think we agree that people are equal in dignity. The problem is that not everybody, Putin obviously doesn't agree that everybody's equal in dignity. Ukrainians aren't, right? Not at the moment anyway. So can you repeat your objection?
Sure. So my objection was on you calling democracy or one man one vote a quasi-communist system. Now, I believe that the reason why you said that is because of the fact that people are not the same. I think the operative word there is people are not the same. You understand? People have different capacities. I don't think equality is a word that you would use to describe something as the differences that you find between humans. I don't think equality is that word. But one thing that we can agree on is that people are equal in dignity. So in that sense,
yes.
Equality becomes substantive. You understand? So when the system says we're giving people the vote, one man, one vote, on the basis of equality, they're not looking at sameness. They're not looking on the basis of sameness. They're looking at on the basis of what? Equality in dignity that is expressed in you being a human being, first of all. So it doesn't take into account your capabilities, it doesn't take into account your other features or characteristics you might have. Just for the sole fact that you're a human being already shows you of that equality and dignity. So I don't see how that can be how you can now say it's a quasi-communist system, because it's actually rooted really in equality, because people are actually equal in the sense that the democracy is operating. Democracy is operating on the equality of dignity, which you agree with. It was operating on the sameness of people. If the assumptions of democracy was that people are the same, so therefore we should give them the same amount of votes, then I think your critique of it being a quasi-communist system would be valid. But in this instance, I don't think it is valid.
I see. Let me try to explain why I claim it's quasi-communist. I've said this a couple of times, but I'm not sure that this has been clear based on your response. I say it's quasi-communist because, or maybe proto-communist is a better word, because it came before communism, and it came through Adam Smith's mistake about the nature of value. The Spanish school of Salamanca had actually gotten it correct, that value is subjective. It depends on how much a person is willing to pay for an object.
I'm with Hayek too, by the way. I'm with Hayek. So
yeah, no,
I'm not
absolutely.
a Keynesian. I'm Hayek. So
absolutely,
I'm all about
absolutely.
that. Yeah.
And this was a couple centuries before Adam Smith, but Adam Smith built his theory or his ideas on the idea that value depends on how much work I put into an object. So the object has value in itself, rather than how much a consumer is willing to pay for that object. Okay, so my claim is, and that why I say it's quasi-communist, one person, one vote, is because it's treating society itself as if it were something that has value in itself when it doesn't. Society or a nation doesn't have value independent of the individuals who make up that society. Every individual. Say again?
So we have to care for it.
Exactly, to different degrees. Some people don't care, some people care more. This is the way humans work. So to proceed as if everybody cared the same and everybody should have an equal say in public policy, this is why I claim it's a quasi-communist mistake, because not everybody has the same value for that society. That's the claim, or that's why I say it's quasi-communist. Not because I'm claiming that the US or the West or liberal democracy operates under the assumption that everybody's the same. No, that I don't think anybody really believes that everybody is the same. We all understand that everybody's different. So that's not part of the argument.
Yeah, but we use the vote as an equalizer, though. Here in the U.S., we use it because we understand that not all people are have the same interests, and those interests have different values. Right? We don't place the value of the vote, on the value of the person. We use it as a leveling or an equalizing force to say that, well, your interests might be over here and mine are over here, but because we only get one vote, it levels it across all one plane of existence, because you have the tyranny of the minority and the tyranny of the majority, which is what democracies basically are, and that's where you get into trouble with one vote. You know what I mean? Because that one vote has no leveling system, right?
Right,
but a republic does.
But I think, to Luis's point, the person who is like here, like they're anti the proposal, and the person who is pro the proposal, but the person who is actually anti the proposal, they're like, I don't really care about it, right? But like their vote equals out, even though the person who's pro the proposal, like they passionately care about this, and so he's trying to factor that in.
Yeah, it's anti-competitive, it's anti-capitalist, it's anti-nature. That's just not the way nature works.
Yeah.
And that's why I call it quasi-communist. In addition, Charles, let me point this out, that there's an inherent contradiction in your position, because if you agree that everybody has equal dignity, then you give everybody an equal vote, but some people don't agree that everybody has equal dignity. So they vote on taking away the dignity of others. So there's an inherent contradiction in your statement.
No,
there's
not a contradiction.
Sorry.
That's not a contradiction in statements, because that can just be as true for your proposal. You understand? Because I don't even have to agree with your proposal. If it becomes operable, I would have to operate within that system. You understand? And then I can do whatever I want to do with the system as well. So I think it's something that applies both ways. It is not an objection that is unique to my position. You understand?
No, I'm sorry. I don't understand. I don't understand the response.
Okay. So
hey,
you're saying
jump in real quick and make one comment?
Well, we'll let Charles finish.
Yeah, I'll let Charles finish, because I don't understand that response.
Okay. So you're saying that the inherent contradiction in my system is I assume.
What's the contradiction? What's the contradiction?
Let me say what you.
Can you repeat the contradiction?
You said there's a contradiction in my position, in the sense that some people, even though we are assuming that people are equal in dignity, some people within the system do not believe that people are equal in dignity. Therefore, they would use the fact that they have that power to probably implement policies that will favor their position of not being equal in dignity, right?
Exactly.
That was
Very
what
good.
is good.
Okay.
Now,
So you don't think that's a contradiction?
It is, but it's not a contradiction that is unique to my position. It's a contradiction that can also be found in yours as well. Because I don't have to agree with your position. Everybody doesn't even have to agree with your position for it to be implementable. For example, not everybody agrees with democracy, but it's still a system that is currently operating. So in that case, if your system becomes what we operate based on, and I don't agree with it, I could also take advantage of whatever it is in that system to my own, to further my own interest, further my own benefits. So I don't see how that contradiction is unique to my position. That's the point I was trying to make.
Okay. Well, let me revert back to the bell curve and understand that people aren't equal, right? So under what I'm proposing, we're operating under the assumption that there are some people.
Sorry, Luis.
Yes.
Can you define the term equality? When you say equal, what do you mean? Can you make it very, very succinct for us so that we know we're on the same page? What is equality?
I would say dissimilar personally, but that's just me.
In what statement? In one person, one vote, people are in principle equal. No, they all have one vote. So is that what you mean, or what do you mean?
No, no,
Define
no. I want to
equality.
define the word. I want you to define, because you're saying people are not equal. So we have to know what equality is objectively for us to be able to assess whether or not statement that people are not equal is true. So what exact is equality?
Yeah, good question. I suppose that I would say equality is that there are no differences between one person to the other. In other words, every person is the same height or the same weight or the same intelligence, has the same genetics, has the same background, has the same taste, has the same. In that sense, people are not equal. That's what I mean. In other words, that people
But
are not.
but that's what comes to the mind of everybody when they hear the word people are equal. When you say people are equal, nobody assumes that it means everybody has the same height, everybody has the same weight, everybody has the same background, or everybody has the same capabilities. That's just not true. Nobody, I can take a poll here, nobody believes that is what it means when they say people are equal.
I disagree with that because it's actually institutionalized in American law. Everybody has one vote. So this is the
The
idea. Everybody
vote
has one vote.
that vote is a consequence of something else. I'm talking about definition of equality. The definition of equality that you just gave, I do not think that that was what the founders had in mind when they said people are equal. I think
No,
they
the
meant
definitely.
people are
No, I
so
agree. I agree. I agree. They did not have it in
exactly.
mind. They were not aware of their error, but we can be aware of it today. It's an error.
Even
It's an
today,
error about.
even today. Okay, now Chloe, Mr. Pelu, Kui, Steve, when you hear the word quality as regards as it refers to people, what comes to your mind? Is it a concept or a sense of people being same height, the same background, the same whatever? Is that what comes to your mind?
No,
No,
but it's not
what
mine
comes to my
either.
mind is someone who has less value than another human being, and that's why I have a problem. That's why I said I would use the word dissimilar, because at least that it attenuates the actual purpose of what you're trying to get across. Because unequal to me is like, because of the racial history in our country, we like we don't use that word because it means
Mhm.
that to us. It means that if I was a white supremacist, I would say that Chloe is less of a human being than me, therefore she is unequal. And so we tend to, like, we don't use that definition or that word in our vocabulary here at all, because we know that
Okay,
that's
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 fine.
bullshit, because I know that Chloe is probably a better person than I am. You know what I mean? But I get to make that choice. I get to make that valuation. But I think that's why Charles is hitting so hard on that, is because that might be a point where we're like, there's a false or there's an equivocation going on, where one of us thinks that you're using the definition of one word and you're actually using a definition of the same word that's different. Does that make sense?
Okay, well, when I'm referring to unequal or equal, I'm referring to, on the one hand, the physical fact that humans just aren't equal. But that's not the crux of the argument. The crux of the argument is the error is in one person, one vote. There is an unmistakable equality in that concept.
Yeah, so I'm wrapping my head around this stuff, but so I'm thinking about this in like in other contexts, we wouldn't, as people, we would never accept one person, one vote, right? In order to get things done. And that's what you're talking about, voting to get things done, right? To resolving issues, to creating, like, to making decisions. Because, like, for example, let's say we're in a company, right? That there are 100 employees. And if we implemented one person, one vote to decide, um, like, okay, we're going to switch insurance companies or something like that, or something that's very like that, like a company A will give you everything that you want in terms of a policy, and then, but it's going to cost the company X amount of money and they're going to be out of business in 5 months. Or company B, where it's like they're going to cover most of the stuff that people want, but it's going to be more affordable for the company. And so would we want every single employee down to the janitor all the way up to the CEO making those decisions, like one person, one vote? I understand in that sense that would make it communistic, because people self-interested would be like, no, I want full blown everything. I don't even care if the company goes out of business, because the amount of time it's in business, I get everything covered, right? Even all of my pre-existing conditions. But the people who are invested in the company, that want the company to survive, but also want to help their employees, they should have the weight of making the decision as to which health company they should go with, right?
Absolutely.
Because I think that's how I understand this idea, right? Because in terms of the hierarchy of who's interested, and it's more clear in a company, because, like an executive, yes, they can make horrible, decisions. It can be, all these controversies. But if you're talking about the clear value of what they're meant to do, they want the company to exist as long as possible. And they have a certain criteria as to how they're going to make those decisions, while the employee, if they're a minimum wage employee, they might not care if the company exists for like the next 50 years. They would prefer to make the decisions that benefit themselves now. And if they had the same vote as like a person who was forward thinking for the company, it would probably be disastrous.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely. I think you hit the
sorry,
nail on the
Louis,
head.
can I just interject here, Louis? Now, what the analogy you just gave, you know why it doesn't work? Because in the voting system, people are not voting for specific outcomes. People are voting for people. They are voting people to power who would make the decision. So it's the same thing as the company, where the CEO, by whatever mechanism gets into being the CEO, who is going to make the final decision in the end. It's like whatever means he gets in there, that's the same as the voting process. So even in a democracy, everybody, it's not the case that if there's a policy or if there's something that needs to be done, everybody comes out to vote on where it's going to go. No, they are voting for one person who now has the power, the discretionary power to make those policy decisions. So that's why I think that it doesn't work. This analogy doesn't
there are
work.
different types of voting. There are elections, but then there's also like actually voting for like, we are going to approve of this bond. We're going to approve of the school budget. We're going to approve that we're going to invest $1 million into improving a road. Like those are things that I have voted on. I haven't voted for a politician to, like a politician like locally, they have proposed those things, but they have to put them up for the vote for people to decide those things. So like there's a difference between, I think that's the conflict of, there's a difference between elections and voting in terms of you're electing an official, but then also like even in terms of elected officials, like they all get into a room and then they have one person, one vote in that room, right?
Exactly.
And then, but if we're talking about like actually voting on like bonds or, approving of salary increases. I have voted on salary increases for like teachers, or like how much you're going to invest into a library. Those are things that people actually on a local level do vote on, which is why I was concerned about the local versus federal level, because that one person, one vote on policy is true on a local level.
Well, absolutely. Great points, Chloe. Charles, allow me to give one example of what that communicates, I think, clearly why I call it quasi-communist. Imagine a house being built by two people. One of the person puts in 99% of the work and 99% of the labor. The other puts in 1% of the work and 1% of the capital, rather. Okay, so now an important decision has to be made about that house. Who should decide? According to one person, one vote, they each should have one vote, an equal vote. According to what I'm putting forth, no, the person who has 99% should have more decision over what to do with that house. over that building. That's why I say it's
but it
quasi-communist.
it doesn't necessarily mean that the person who has put in more will make the best decision. For the
Yeah.
fact
No,
that they have put in
but
more,
that's not the claim. But that's not
that's
the
another
claim.
value system.
And you're
Yeah,
setting
but
up
that's
a
not the claim.
disparity
That's not
based
part
on
of the claim.
ability.
He's
Yeah,
talking about
Cody, go ahead.
Oh, see, I wanted to interject earlier, so I know that I missed the beginning, so I'm hoping that Luis could just give me a brief summary about how his concept of inequality between people should affect voting rights.
Yeah, basically what I've just explained here, that if two people build a house and one person invests 99% of the work and the capital, and one person puts in the other 1% or nothing, obviously the person who's put in more work, who's invested more, should have more authority to decide what to do with that house.
Well,
So
the
the
other
same
person didn't have
principle-
the ability to put in that work. What if they're paraplegic, for example?
Then the concept applied to a society then would be that the person who put in 99% of the vote would understand that much more than a person who was only interested in their own well-being or their own economic benefit. That's the idea.
So you assume that those who are capable of doing more will use it to the benefit of others.
I'm not assuming, I'm proposing a competition to find out, to determine who is willing to give the most, demonstrate it through voluntary taxation, and then giving these people more authority in the decision-making process.
All right, most my issue with that is that it relies on people being able to give more in the first place, and not everybody's able to give more or can afford that. So I'm worried about the intrinsic ableism that may come with your concept.
Okay, I think it's a valid objection, but that objection stands as it is now. What we have now under one person, one vote, there are some people who can't give, and there are politicians who are getting filthy rich off of the political system. So what I'm proposing is to compete, to put in politicians that are more likely to make decisions that are favorable for those who cannot contribute. So your concern is a valid one. I'm proposing to improve how society responds to those who are not able to give or to contribute, those who are truly at a disadvantage. And at
I
the same
understand that. I'm
time,
just. Go ahead.
and at the same time, make those who are gaming the system now more responsible.
All
or
right,
more
I'm just
accountable.
generally. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you weren't finished.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Now I'm done. I'm sorry.
I'm just generally skeptical of people who create systems that place people in different positions of authority based on their perceived abilities. Given the history of slavery in the United States being based on many ableist concepts, I've been keenly aware about how those ideas have been put in place. I've talked about the Mudsill speech that was given in Congress during the 1850s in order to advocate for slavery, given the idea that people of African descent were less intelligent than those of European descent, and so they were naturally suited to manual labor, while those of European descent were naturally suited to intellectual labor, which I like to believe that most people understand to be false now. So I generally have a lot of skepticism today when people talk about how people are naturally unequal and have differing abilities and thus should be placed in different positions of authority based on perceived ability. And sadly, that also leads to the consequence of people receiving different resources and amounts of respect based on what their abilities are perceived to be and what work they're allowed to succeed in. So I'd like to know if your system prevents people from being forced into positions that they do not want to be in because they are labeled as being less able or more able than they may actually be.
This is kind of what I was talking to earlier on in the day, or earlier on in the conversation, Louis.
Yeah, well, yeah, obviously agree with your objection and your concerns. I would argue that what's being proposed is to improve on this situation, to put the kinds of people into decision-making positions who are more likely to respond to the historical and current injustices in our social and political systems. And so you're right in pointing out the historical injustices that have been committed against different groups of people. Absolutely agree with that. But I think it's a fallacy to say that because we have discriminated against people in the past, we should never discriminate against people forever. I think we should discriminate against people like Putin. I think we should discriminate against people that are murderous, against people who are politicians who are gaming the political system for personal profit to gain wealth. I think it's a mistake to say because we've discriminated in the past, we should never again discriminate between anybody. This is, I argue, as I've been arguing here, this is a quasi-communist fallacy.
I think that people would create a distinction between discrimination based on people's proven actions and discrimination based on assumptions of a person's inherent abilities or qualities. I believe that you're trying to touch to that with the American concept of all people are created equal. I, of course, have pointed out to how that being taken literally causes issues because, again, I myself am autistic. I'm an advocate for neurodiversity, understanding that people are born with different brains and abilities, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It just, again, makes me skeptical of systems that again, may have intrinsic ableism involved that will work to the disadvantage of people who are labeled as a neurodivergent.
I'd like to add to that really quick, if I could. So I think where both Cody and I are at is that it almost seems like to assume that the actions of the people voting, right, whether they're self-interest or altruistic, but putting a value on either pro or con is kind of a equivocation fallacy, right? We're equating good with one thing versus the other. And I don't think it's a good idea to do so. And I hope that's not what you're advocating for, but it does sound like it's a very, what you would say, a Kendian kind of idea of positive and negative discrimination. But in his case, it's, only positive discrimination can help past negative discrimination. So I don't know if I'm making sense there, but it makes sense in my head. I might not be explaining it the best possible way, but I share Cody's concern about that. I actually have ableism down in my notes as a point of contention to talk about. So.
Mm-hmm. And I understand that I do not hold on to the work or value theory of labor. I understand that people can put a lot of labor into a product or an action that does not have good consequences. I also understand that a lot of people have to work 10 times harder than others in order to achieve the same end. Again, coming back to the issues of disability rights. So again, it just makes me wonder how you account for that issue.
Like, is the result good or is it right? You know what I mean?
People have to work a lot harder for the sake of their own survival than others.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that works to the advantage under the current system of one person, one vote in the US in particular. That works to the advantage of the most intellectually gifted and the most ambitious. So what's happening now and what's happening amongst African Americans, for example, African Americans have never been more polarized socially and economically than ever before. And that polarization has come about precisely because the most motivated, the most ambitious African Americans who have been lucky enough to be born with a lot of talent have outperformed other African Americans who are not as talented and who are not as able. So what you're doing is creating a polarization, not only on African Americans, every group is the same, whites, Latin Americans, the same thing is happening. And the same thing is happening in every part of the planet, precisely because people are not equally talented, people are not equally ambitious, etc. So
and of course, you're ignoring environmental factors too, where not everybody has the same opportunities to capitalize on their talents or expand on their talents.
Absolutely, and I think that makes it. But here's a paradox: and this paradox is well established, and as far as I can tell, a very compelling argument. The more equal you make an environment, the more unequal people actually become. This is demonstrable in many different cases. We'll take the case of the NBA. Prior to 1950 or so, African Americans could not compete in the NBA. Okay, as a result of civil rights and the hard work of many people, those barriers have been eliminated. Now African Americans can compete in the NBA, but this has not made the NBA more equal. In fact, it has made it extremely much more competitive and much more polarized in every single measure, from height, the average height of the NBA in 1950 compared to an NBA player compared to the average population has grown by 3 or 4 inches compared to the average difference now between an NBA player and the average population. Furthermore, now the NBA is dominated at 80% by African Americans. So this demonstrates, we just went through one example, that making an environment equal creates more inequality in the long run. So that's an important paradox to understand.
I think it shows that equality is an abstract concept akin to perfection. What equality means is different to different people. So I'm not really sure about the applicability to your analogy of the NBA to different environments or issues, though.
Well, it applies across the board. It applies across the board. It applies in the economy, it applies in education, it applies in everything across the board. That's just how nature works.
Okay, so back to the voting topic. Who should get more votes?
My argument is that one person, one vote is the wrong idea.
So who should get more votes or less votes?
My proposal is that the persons who demonstrate through their work and through their voluntary taxation more of a commitment to the common good.
Okay, so that really puts disabled people at a disadvantage because often they don't have the means or opportunities or materials to allow that. You're bringing up a similar analogy I remember a few years ago in France, in which an immigrant man, I can't remember from what country, saved a child from a burning building, and the government awarded him French citizenship. And a lot of people's response was, well, not all of us have the opportunity to prove our worth like he did.
He was Nigerian, by the way.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad you remember.
Well, that's a valid...
It's good rewarding people by their actions, but not everyone has the same opportunities to prove their worth like that.
So a couple of responses to that. First of all, I just lost my train of thought here. First of all, you're right. Not everybody has an equal opportunity, especially somebody who's disabled. But that disadvantage is something that already exists, right? So somebody who's not able to who's handicapped is not able to contribute to society in the same, or is not able to get as much from society as that person might be had they not be disabled, right? So that's already an objection to the current system. What I'm proposing is to improve that so that the people who are, and the argument is those who demonstrate through their giving are much more likely than those who go into politics for personal wealth than to look after the disabled, than to commit resources to the disabled, to commit research to the disabled.
Luis, I have one question for you. So
sure.
You're basically saying that those who have demonstrated that they are more aligned with the common good by giving voluntarily above their mandated taxes and some other things should be the ones that have the most voting power, right?
Yes.
Okay. What if the Hitlers and the Putins of the world are the ones who have given for the most for far longer, um, giving a higher percentage of their income above the mandated taxes for far longer. Do you think that they should be given that same that they should be given the high amount of votes that your system assures them?
That what you're proposing is illogical on its face. I'm going to respond in two different ways. One in a very simple way using an analogy, and then we'll go into the details if you want. What you're saying by analogy is like saying, okay, we're going to run a marathon. We're going to see who are the fastest runners. Okay, so we're going to run a marathon, a competition, and we're going to see who are the fastest runners. So what you're saying, Charles, is what if the most unfit and the most overweight people win the competition? Are you going to give them the trophies?
No,
Are you
that's not
going to
what
give
I'm
them
saying. That's not what I'm saying. See,
by
their
analogy? By
ability to
analogy,
give, no, their ability to give is very much divorced from what they are capable of. Putin can, I mean, leaders don't leaders don't become tyrannical right from the first day of office. Some leaders don't. It can happen at a certain point in their life. So up to that point where they become mad per se, they could have been the upstanding citizen. They could have given the most for far longer. I don't think that there's a correlation between the what a person can do, the goodness of the person, and how much can even give if it's a person that really understands how the system works. So Putin, he's a pathological person. What you Hitler is a pathological person. They're going to give as much as they can, the highest that they can, so that they have as much vote to implement whatever policies they want to implement. Your system assures that, irrespective of what they are going to do, by virtue of the fact that they're giving the most for the longest, that they should have the maximum amount of votes. Is it?
yes, that's right. And I responded to this earlier, Charles. So I'm a little bit baffled by returning to this because you raised this earlier, and I responded that Putin, if he gave all of his money for the longest time, would not have all of the power. He would be one person among many, 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 many others who have the same power. So he would have to convince everybody else to act in the ways that you think that would be detrimental to society. So if that's the argument, if you're saying that, okay, everybody who gives the most for the longest amount of time, that let's say that in the US, let's say 1%. So 300,000 people are going to give away all of their money, all of their work in order to screw everybody over. I'd have to hear more about this
But
argument because
it's essentially the same thing as the one man one vote, because one man vote does not guarantee that he will become a dictator. For anyone to become a dictator, he has to also convince a whole lot of people to give him his one vote. So what I see you're doing here is one man one vote is 1/2. Your proposition is um, uh, making it a big fraction of 200 over 100. So at the end of the day, it still comes back to the same sort of the same level. There is an equalizing effect. Your system will equalize itself out in the sense that actually nobody even has any power over the other person at the end of the day, which is what we also have now. Nobody really has more power over any other person based on the one vote that they have. So if a Putin wants to work in a democracy, he has to convince many people to give him his one vote. And in your system as well, if a Putin wants to do it, he also has to convince a whole lot of other people who have that maximum amount of votes to give him the votes. I don't see how this is an upgrade on the current system that we have. I just think it's a complication of the current system that we have.
I'd also be somewhat skeptical too, because I'm wondering, well, how do you measure if an action is sincerely altruistic?
Again, the proposal is to give your money away.
But to whom? Like, how do we understand if the money given away is truly being put to altruistic means?
Well, I suppose at the outset would be through to the government, and then by giving more power, more authority to those who give the most, then this would be extended to people who simply contribute to society more than others, whether through volunteer work or through art or through contributions to science, whatever it might be. So whoever gives the most, that's the idea.
All right, I'm still afraid of the ableism in that, because again, not everybody has the same opportunities to give or perform certain deeds. I'd also be a little skeptical too, because yeah, there was comments earlier about altruism for the sake of the individual and the sake of the group. Some arguing that Putin's being altruistic because he's committing actions that would be quote unquote good for the Russian people. I think that in that case, we're talking a lot about ideas of individualism and collectivism, but it brings up a good point in that a lot of people limit their altruistic actions to those they identify as being in their own social group. So I'd be worried about people who only commit altruistic actions for the sake of those that they identify as being within their own social group, and who refuse to commit altruistic acts for those they deem outside their social group. Again, I've seen many people saying, well, I don't want my money going to those kinds of people.
Well, that's a very valid point. Chloe brought this up earlier. Chloe, do you remember the argument you brought up earlier about that? I don't know if you remember my response.
I don't. You have to remind me.
Okay, no, I'll respond to it. No, that's a very valid response. So the idea is that if you give more on the local level, then you have authority on your local level. But if you give more on an international level, then you have more authority on an international or national level. So I think that would respond to your objection.
All right. Do you take into account concepts of equity and percentages? I'm reminded of the Bible story in which Jesus saw different people donating to the church, and he saw a poor old woman put one coin into the offering plate, and he said that woman gave more than any other combined because he understood that she had less to give, and so gave more of her collective wealth. I'm wondering if your system takes into account then disparities between people based on their resources and abilities.
Absolutely, yes, it's proportional. It would have to be. If it wasn't proportional, it would essentially make what we have now a lot worse. It would give the people in power a lot more power. So yeah, it definitely does the opposite. What it's meant to do is the people who have money, remove them from power. So it's interesting that you bring the Bible up, because what I'm proposing actuates or puts into practice the idea that Jesus said you can't serve God and money. You have to decide one or the other. So in this case, you have to decide, do you want to live for your own well-being, or do you want to live for the well-being of society or the planet or human beings in general?
So would this then allow people with disabilities or people in poverty to gain more power by them giving up some of their what percentages of wealth they may have, and also committing what actions that they can based on their own abilities?
Absolutely, sure. I would argue that somebody like Christ in the parable that you mentioned would be more likely to take into consideration the disabled person who's contributing a relatively small amount, but that contribution represents a much greater sacrifice than Bill Gates, who might give, half of his wealth, but it's very simple for him, right?
Okay.
But so I think that there are different people who would value that contribution in different ways. My argument is that our current political systems around the planet are unfavorable to the most vulnerable populations. So I actually agree with everything you're saying.
Okay.
Is it possible that one person, one vote is also a limiter on those who have more access to wealth than less?
A limiter. Can you elaborate, please?
Yeah. So let's say that one person who is handicapped and one person who is not handicapped, right? So they're completely able-bodied, whatever. Well, the person who is able-bodied is going to tend to vote for more things that affect them than do other people,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
Especially if we're not aware that there's a problem with, the handicapped person. I don't know if that's
Sure.
the correct terminology. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. So if the person who was handicapped had less of a vote for whatever reason, right? Let's say that they can't work. They have no income besides Social Security. They have no savings, right? They don't have much to give. Your plan accounts for that. I understand that, where 5% to someone who has no money or has little money counts for the same as someone who puts in 5% of 50 billion, right?
Sure.
If I'm assuming that that's the system that you're using, right?
Mm-hmm.
But two things that occur from that is that the 5% that the poor person is putting in is way more valuable than the 5%. Like that 5% that they give in could mean the difference between eating 2 days a week, where the 5% that the rich person is putting in has no factor in that, right? So the minimum that someone could put in means a drastically different value of life for them as a human being than it does if it's someone who is incredibly wealthy like Jeff Bezos, right? So there's an inherent disparity between those two percentage points because it's not taken into account the value of life that the person is actually living. So would it not be better to limit the richer person's vote to just one vote rather than increase one and decrease the other and artificially try to manipulate the system rather than just keep it even?
Thank you.
I would argue definitely not, based on principles and logic. The communist principles I've already mentioned being the first. Second is that you're under the impression that Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or any of these people who have a lot of wealth and donated a lot would have power. They essentially would not have power. Jeff Bezos, if he gave half, he would not compare to all of the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who gave everything. So
Yeah,
Jeff
but
Bezos
the
would be a
poor person,
non-factor.
yeah, but the poor person gives 5%, but they're still going to be hungry.
No,
That's my
because
point.
the argument is that if we organize society in this direction, all of the people who have given 100% of their wealth is going to go precisely to make sure that that person who has nothing has everything they need.
Well, that sounds more socialistic, communistic than just one vote does.
No,
So
You know what I
no,
mean?
no,
essentially,
I'm sorry,
no,
I don't mean to
essentially-
laugh. I'm not being
No,
facetious. I'm not trying to be rude.
it's
I'm
Louis,
sorry.
voluntary. It's
Louis,
voluntary.
Louis,
It's voluntary.
Louis, now, from
So
what
it's
you
not
just said,
communist,
it
it's
means that
voluntary.
if I'm earning $100 a month, I know that $100 cannot sustain me. You understand? It cannot sustain the basic minimum standard of living that I want to live. But I also know that if I'm able to give out the $100 itself, the whole of the $100 itself, that the state will take care of me and give me a minimum standard of living. So I don't need to work. I don't need to stress myself. I don't need to try and improve myself. All I just need to do is make $100 and make sure I give out that $100 because the state is going to take care of me based on me giving out $100.
No, you don't even have to give your $100 if you don't want. Under the proposal, if you're willing to live the kind of simple, ascetic life that will be provided for you by the voluntary tax-paying elite, you don't have to give anything. But in return for that not giving anything, you're not going to have a say in what the rules are. So you'll be fine. If you don't want to give anything, don't give anything. The idea here is to respect everybody's dignity.
Well,
Maybe we should table it for another conversation. Charles, what do you think? Because we've been at it for 3 hours, and we were supposed to only have Luis for an hour.
So,
I'm happy to talk about it. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
so an unequal distribution of time here.
Chloe, Steve, Luis, then I'll give my final thoughts. So let's go.
Oh, me first? Yeah, so at least, you know, how I just understand it, and going back to it, just how to make decisions. And I think that the thing that is kind of the thing that catches people, like, or there's like people talking past each other, is because we're associating one person, one vote for voting a public official, right? And I think the thing is that at the end of the day, you know, there are a lot of things that we actually can vote on that we actually choose not to vote on at all. And we're kind of giving our power away, our votes away, because that's the mindset I'm thinking of, like making decisions and how we make decisions. And maybe some people kind of have an invested interest or more education or more knowledge about something to make a better decision than someone just Joe Schmo off the street that just saw like an attack ad, and then suddenly now they're afraid of this thing, and then now they have a vote to vote down this thing that some fear-mongering PR manager has been able to convince them of. And instead, we should, you know, and I'm talking about like specific in decisions, but I think that there is, like, I guess I'm going to say I'm not completely sold on doing that model for voting for people. I think that we've talked about decisions, and I agree, and I understand that aspect more, but for voting for people, they can give us the correct talk and everything like that on how, you know, they're going to make the best decisions, and they're going to vote our way in terms of, you know, how the people have voted for them to vote them in to make the correct decisions. But then when they get to Congress, they become completely corrupt, right? And so I'm just wondering, that's my biggest concern at this point, of how the system would change, you know, how we vote in people to make decisions on our behalf, to make sure that they're not going to screw us over.
Is it me next?
Sure.
Cody.
Okay. Cody's next. Okay.
All right, then. Just want to say I'm sorry for coming in late. I'll have to go back and listen to the bits of the conversation that I missed, so I'm more filled in on things. Want to say that I'm just generally concerned about how different political and economic systems can be reformed in order to help people who are disadvantaged and suffer from different prejudices in the cultures that we live in. And sadly, that's often people who live with disabilities. So I want to make sure that any questions of reform are done to the benefit of those who need more help.
Thank you. Mr. Pilu.
Yes. Thanks for having me today. And it was great talking to you, Mr. Dr. Luiz Razo. It was great talking to you. It's very interesting ideas. I'm gonna go back and look at your idea. I started watching them. It's very interesting. And I know today the funny thing about it, we mentioned a lot about Putin and Zelensky today. And recently I produced a wonderful program called Blood Brothers, and I put in the back chat. Can Charles put it down? Can Charles put it down? Everybody, if you haven't can catch Blood Brothers, watch Blood Brothers, because Blood Brothers 2 is coming out soon. So watch Blood Brothers. Subscribe to Coach Love's channel. Shout out Coach Love. Blood Brothers 2 is coming out tomorrow. I have another program with one of the people that was on Blood Brothers, but the Blood Brothers series is a great series on the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So and Brother Razo, Bob, you mentioned that a lot today. So watch my Blood Brothers. Everybody subscribe to Coach Love. Watch Blood Brothers and you know, and thanks for having me. Blood Brothers 2 is coming out soon. Blood Brothers 2. So everybody so everybody click notifications, and then you notify when it comes out. Thank you.
No.
Somebody sharing the screen. Oh, there we go.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for coming on here, Mr. Bravo, and talking about this, because I know I kind of know what it feels like to have to defend your position on your ideas. I did that. I think it was last week. And it can be, stressful, to say the least. So I really respect the fact that you came on here and you talked about, your ideas, and you're honest and stuff like that. And that was ineloquent, but I really, I've got so many more questions. I'm not going to make a judgment yet, but I do have a ton more questions, really, and a lot of those have to deal with what I've discussed already. I don't want to say I'm not satisfied with your answers. I'm just not clear how you come to those answers. Really, it's about the process a little bit for me. And there's still other questions about ethics and morals that I have when applying your idea to society as well. So, but I did learn a lot today, and I really appreciate you taking your time and your patience to talk to all of us, and especially me. But I really appreciate you being here and doing this. This is great. Really appreciate it.
Well, for me, I think I'm the last person, right? Or Charles, did you want to say something?
Charles is the last person. Yeah.
Oh, Charles. Okay. Let me.
Yeah,
let me
Luis,
just
go.
thank all- Okay. Let me just thank all of you. It's been a pleasure. On my part, I sincerely appreciate it. I will say this, that I've been at this for 20 years or so, and have dealt with people from every corner of the planet. And I've dealt with very, very bright people about this. And typically it's a very, very complex set of ideas. It's very simple on the face of it, but it's very, very complex. And I'm going to repeat something that may be offensive or may grate on people, but I have yet to find somebody who comes up with a non-contradictory objection. And I'm going to stand by that claim today. You've all raised some good points, but what typically happens, what typically happens is people ignore the idea, right? But those who don't ignore it typically take a long time to think about it, think it through, and I'm talking long, like in months or years. But those people, every single one, without exception, and I say this honestly, come back and say, you're right. You've dealt with every single one of my objections. And I respectfully invite all of you to think about the objections that you've brought up tonight. If it matters to you, if it doesn't matter to you, obviously you'll forget about this. But if anybody cares about this stuff and really wants to challenge themselves intellectually, see where I'm going wrong, or help me. If I'm wrong, please help me out. I'll be the first one to say, I want to see where I'm wrong. To think about it and come back at me. I'm always open to talk to anybody about these things or about any of my ideas. So thanks a lot for your time. I appreciate it. It's been, like I said, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah. So this conversation was supposed to last for 1 hour 30 minutes, and we've done it for more than 3 hours. And there were some really questions that Christina, I'm very sorry that we didn't take your question today. Maybe I'll take note of it next time we're having a conversation. We're going to address those questions. So thank you all for coming. Chloe, Vanara, Mr. Pelu, Steve, and obviously Luiz Razo. Thank you for taking out your time. Now, I would say two things. My first point is that I think your primary basis for discounting the one person, one vote system, which is on the idea that people are equal or not equal, I think it's false in the sense that you're using equality in a sense that people do not understand it to be. When people hear the word equality, they don't think or assume that it means that people are all the same, or that people have the same intelligence, people have the same height, same weight, same background. No, I don't think that's the sense that it occurs naturally to most people. What comes to the minds of most people is people are equal in dignity. So I think we really need to work on that and I wasn't really satisfied with the definition of equality that you gave. Now, the other point is, I would say, I would quote Saul, who says that there are no solutions, only compromises. There are only trade-offs, no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And I think that even your system is the solution in itself, just a trade-off. So we have to ask ourselves, what trade-offs are we willing to accept for the solution that your system is proposing? I don't think your system is perfect. Neither is the democracy that we currently have. But I think that the trade-offs with democracy are much more trade-offs with democracy are much more palatable than the trade-offs that we would get from your system. So on that note, uh, I would still have to say that I would invite you back to have another conversation. But I must really say that I admire your strength, I admire your composure, I admire that you understood your concept and you were not phased and you just kept answering it as we were asking these questions. And we do hope that you come back and we'll talk more. So thank you very much, and thank you all for coming to this stream today. That will be
Thank you.
goodbye now.
It would be an honor. It would be an honor to come back. Thanks a lot to everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Yeah.